The ex-soldier, seated in his wheelchair, tried to say goodbye to his war dog in the courtroom, believing he would never see him again. But when the animal ran up to him and suddenly revealed an ability no one expected, the veteran's heart raced. Everyone held their breath in that moment, and then something happened that made everyone stand in silence, stunned by what they were witnessing. Sergeant Daniel Brooks had never felt the cold quite like that morning. Although the temperature outside the courthouse was mild, a chill burrowed into his heart, a chill that came from the realization he was about to say farewell to his most loyal companion. He stood in front of the tall wooden doors, palm resting against the ornate handle, remembering every mission, every desert sunrise, every dark night he and his dog, Apollo, had shared while serving in the army. Today, Daniel wasn't stepping in to receive accolades for heroism. He was here to finalize a court decision that would rip away the last piece of the life he once knew. Inside, the corridors smelled of aged varnish and fresh coffee from a vending machine tucked near the waiting area. Daniel's uniform, pressed specifically for this day, felt heavier than ever, as if weighted by memories. Each polished button caught reflections of passers-by, some offering polite nods, others throwing curious glances toward the tall man standing beside a large Belgian Malinois. For those who didn't know the pair, it was an unusual sight, a retired soldier in full regalia, accompanied by a dog wearing a vest bearing faint insignia from a military K-9 unit. At the far end of the hallway, a clerk signaled for them to enter one of the hearing rooms. Daniel noticed how his fellow veterans, who sat on nearby benches, lowered their gazes in sympathy. They understood too well how the battles at home could sometimes be the hardest. If war had taught Daniel anything, it was that wounds to the heart often cut deeper than the ones on the flesh. Apollo remained calm, stepping in time with Daniel. He was trained not to bark unless commanded, but there was a low tremor in his throat, as though he sensed the tension in the air. For 8 years, Apollo had been more than just a military working dog. He was partner, confidant, and in the darkest moments, protector of Daniel's spirit. The bond they shared went beyond standard soldier and dog protocol. It was a quiet understanding between two souls who had seen the worst of humanity yet still found solace in one another. Just before entering, Daniel glanced down at Apollo. "Easy, boy," he whispered, placing a gentle hand on the dog's head. Apollo's ears flicked forward, acknowledging the command as if to say, "I'm here." Daniel exhaled, set his jaw, and pushed open the door. The courtroom was smaller than he imagined, more a hearing chamber than a dramatic set one might see in movies. Rows of pew-like benches stood behind a wooden railing, and the judge's bench rose modestly at the front. On the left side sat a lawyer in a sharp suit, representing the private security company that claimed legal ownership of Apollo. Because Daniel had once served under a specialized contract, any K-9 he worked with theoretically remained the property of the military or of partnered agencies. At least that was what the document said. Daniel's attorney, a soft-spoken woman named Ellen Warren, motioned for him to join her at the front. Her eyes carried a persistent warmth, but also a trace of resignation. She had warned Daniel that the case was complicated. Despite Apollo's years of loyal service under Daniel's command, the dog was slated to be transferred to a private firm that insisted they could use his specialized training for high-tier security jobs. And in a cruel twist of policy, Daniel's medical discharge meant he had no official right to keep the dog, despite the bond forged through real combat. "All rise," came the voice of the bailiff. Judge Harriet Green, known for her rigorous adherence to the letter of the law, entered. After the brief formalities, she settled behind the bench, adjusting her glasses while scanning the papers in front of her. Daniel could feel the dryness in his throat. Even the presence of Apollo, usually so grounding, could not ease the dread he felt. He stood at attention as the judge began reading the relevant background. Sergeant Brooks, decorated for bravery in multiple overseas deployments, honorably discharged due to a severe leg injury, and Apollo, a military K-9 with advanced threat detection skills. The lawyer for the security company stood and articulated the firm's position. He spoke in a clipped tone about standard procedure, the need for certain K-9 units in private sectors, and how the dog was still considered company property. Daniel wanted to shout that Apollo was no one's property. But the soldier in him, disciplined by years of chain-of-command culture, kept his composure. He only allowed himself a quick glance toward Apollo, who waited calmly by his side. When Ellen presented Daniel's side, she highlighted the emotional and psychological bond between man and dog, emphasizing that Daniel's PTSD symptoms improved significantly whenever Apollo was near. Without Apollo, she argued, Daniel's struggles in readjusting to civilian life could intensify. She cited testimonies from fellow servicemen and even from a military psychologist who believed forcibly separating them could be detrimental to Daniel's recovery. Throughout the proceedings, Judge Green's expression remained neutral. Occasionally, she'd glance over her spectacles at Apollo, perhaps noting the unwavering focus in the dog's eyes or the gentle wag of the tail when Daniel spoke. Yet, legalities were rarely swayed by sentiment alone. After almost an hour of back-and-forth discussion, the judge signaled for a recess, intending to review some additional paperwork. The tension in the air felt almost tangible. Daniel knelt beside Apollo, pressing his forehead against the dog's. "If I lose you today, boy, I just don't know." His voice cracked with emotion. Apollo nuzzled him in response, a quiet reassurance that no matter what happened, their bond was real. Ellen quietly approached. "They're pulling out every clause in the contract," she said, gently placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "But don't lose hope. The judge asked for a break for a reason. She might be looking for a loophole or some precedent." Daniel nodded, though his heart felt heavy. They lingered in the corridor. Daniel tried to distract himself by studying details of the building's architecture. Tall columns, intricately carved moldings, anything to keep from picturing the heartbreaking moment he might lose Apollo forever. His thoughts drifted back to that desert evening, under a crimson sky, when an IED nearly took Daniel's life. It was Apollo's bark that had alerted him just in time to throw himself behind a truck for cover. The dog had saved not just his body, but the fragile thread of hope Daniel held on to. How could a stack of papers sever a bond forged in life-or-death battles? When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Green was already seated reading from a file. She looked up, inviting both parties to stand again. The hush that fell over the room was profound. "In matters like these," she began, her voice echoing in the quiet, "the law can seem black and white. Military service dogs often remain under the jurisdiction of whichever organization financed their training. However, we must also consider each specific set of circumstances. Sergeant Brooks, everything in your record indicates exemplary conduct. The loyalty and bond you share with Apollo is beyond dispute. Nevertheless, the official paperwork states that upon your discharge, the dog's future deployment was reassigned to a third party. It's not typical for the court to intervene in such assignments." Daniel's chest tightened. This was it, the final blow. "However," the judge continued, "there is a clause regarding medically necessary support animals. While Apollo was trained as a K-9 soldier, his role shifted significantly once you returned stateside. Your medical evaluations, as provided by your attorney, show that Apollo functions as a critical component of your therapeutic process. This suggests he may be recognized, at least in part, as a service animal required for your mental health. But to confirm this, we must establish formal documentation from a licensed practitioner stating that separation from Apollo would cause significant harm to your well-being." The security firm's lawyer tried to object, but Judge Green raised a hand. "I have read your documents carefully. As of now, you have not provided evidence refuting the dog's potential status as a necessary support animal. If you cannot do so, the court will have to weigh Sergeant Brooks's medical needs against your contractual claim. Murmurs traveled through the small crowd. Ellen leaned over to Daniel, whispering that this was a small victory. They might just have time to obtain that official certification. The judge then announced another recess, urging Daniel to present any additional documents promptly. The wave of relief that swept over Daniel was brief but powerful. The next few minutes were a blur of phone calls. Ellen reached out to the military psychologist, who agreed to supply the necessary forms. Yet, as Daniel stepped out to catch his breath, his phone buzzed. The name on the screen made his stomach clench. Captain Rogers, his old commanding officer. A man who, Daniel suspected, had ties to the very same private security company. Guilt and old loyalties churned in Daniel's mind. He walked down the hallway, ignoring the curious looks from bystanders, and pressed the phone to his ear. "Sergeant, I've heard about your hearing," Rogers said, voice low. "You know the dog was always meant to be reassigned. The company is doing important work. I'm sorry about your injuries, but let's be honest. We can't let emotions overshadow critical missions." "Critical missions," Daniel repeated, his throat tight. "Sir, this dog, Apollo, saved countless lives. And I'm not just talking about the battlefield. He's saved me every day since I came home." Rogers didn't respond immediately. When he did, his tone was dismissive. "Look, soldier, there's a reality here you need to accept. Sentimentality never won a war. It won't help you now." The call ended. Daniel held the phone at his side, feeling an ache in his chest. At times, the very institution that had once been his pride now felt alien. He recalled how, in the swirling desert sand, Apollo was the only constant he could rely on. How ironic that in the realm of legal contracts, such devotion was overshadowed by fine print. Back in the courtroom, a hush fell again as the judge returned to her seat. A tall figure entered through the side door just then, a silver-haired woman with kind eyes, Dr. Rivera, the military psychologist. She handed a folder of papers to Ellen. With a nod, the judge received the documents, skimming them quietly. Finally, she folded her hands and looked at Daniel. "These forms indicate that Apollo has been acting in a capacity akin to a medical support animal," she said, her voice carrying a note of empathy. "As such, it would be detrimental to Sergeant Brooks's mental health to remove the dog from his care abruptly. Private Security Counsel, do you have any evidence that contradicts these findings?" The opposing lawyer rifled through his notes, pale with frustration. He glanced around, but there was nothing else to say. The law was clear enough in situations where a certified service dog was at stake. "Very well," Judge Green said. "I rule that Apollo remain with Sergeant Brooks under the classification of a service animal, pending a permanent licensing process. This hearing is adjourned." The gavel struck. In that single resonant crack, all the tension in Daniel's body dissipated. He looked down at Apollo, who thumped his tail against the floor, head tilted in quiet curiosity. The unexpected had happened. The judge, following the law yet acknowledging the bond between man and dog, had paved a path for them to stay together. A surge of emotion overtook Daniel. This time he did not fight the tears. He knelt and wrapped his arms around Apollo's neck. The dog licked his cheek, as though wanting to reassure him that everything would be all right. As the small crowd began to disperse, people approached to congratulate Daniel, some from other branches of service, others just animal lovers who had come to witness the hearing. The security firm's lawyer left in a silent hurry, clearly displeased but with no recourse. Ellen knelt beside Daniel, offering a gentle smile. "I told you not to lose hope," she whispered, resting a hand on Apollo's back. "Sometimes the legal system surprises us, and sometimes it does the right thing." Judge Green, having removed her robe, approached more informally. "You fought bravely for your country, Sergeant," she said. "I'm glad you stood up for this dog who fought alongside you." Daniel stood, nodding his thanks. He was still in awe of everything that had happened. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you don't know what this means." "Thank you." The judge nodded. "Take good care of him." As she left, Daniel gathered his belongings, noticing how the weight on his shoulders felt lighter than it had in years. Walking out of the courthouse with Apollo at his side, he realized it was the first time in a long while that he felt truly whole. The future was still uncertain. He had physical scars to heal, nightmares that visited him often, and a civilian life that felt strange and uncharted. But at least he had his best friend by his side, legally and forever. Outside, the sun bathed the steps in gold. Apollo trotted down confidently, pausing to sniff the air. People on the street stopped, some smiling at the sight of a soldier and his dog emerging victorious. With a sense of renewed purpose, Daniel looked at the wide expanse of the city, the next chapter of his life waiting just beyond the courthouse steps. If this story has moved you so far, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like. And tell us in the comments, from which city are you watching? Daniel took the courthouse steps slowly, each footfall accompanied by Apollo's steady trot. Outside, the afternoon light glistened off passing cars, and the normal city hustle felt oddly serene compared to the tension that had ruled inside. Ellen gave Daniel a congratulatory pat on the shoulder, then rushed off to file final paperwork, leaving him momentarily alone in the swirl of bystanders. He paused at the bottom of the steps, leaning down to ruffle Apollo's ears. The dog's calm gaze seemed to ground him, reminding Daniel that no matter what else might come, they were free, together. He hadn't driven to the courthouse. With so much uncertainty that morning, he'd chosen public transit, half expecting to leave in tears without Apollo. Now, though, he walked toward the bus stop with a subtle pride in his posture, not minding how fellow pedestrians gawked at a muscular, uniformed man with a well-trained service dog. Typically, a life spent in rigorous discipline had taught him to keep his head down, but this day felt special. There was a quiet victory pulsing through him, a renewed sense of hope. They boarded a bus that rattled through the city. People offered Daniel polite nods. Some recognized the insignia on his jacket and murmured thanks for his service. He responded with half smiles, still too overwhelmed to speak. Apollo settled at his feet, gaze fixed on Daniel, as if to confirm he was content simply to be near his handler, no matter where they ended up. When the bus lurched at a stoplight, Daniel reflexively gripped a railing, a flash of memory returning him to a jolt in a military transport vehicle overseas. Apollo nudged Daniel's leg, pulling him back to the safety of the present. Their destination was an older apartment complex on the city's northern side. A buddy of Daniel's, a fellow veteran named Marcus, had offered an affordable studio until Daniel could find something long-term. It wasn't ideal, a cramped space up 3 flights of stairs, but it allowed large dogs. Daniel had quickly learned that many landlords refused to rent to someone with a dog Apollo's size, especially if they heard the word military. He was thankful to have Marcus's understanding. They disembarked at a busy intersection, warm air tinged with the smell of fried food from a small restaurant. The crosswalk sign chirped, urging a cluster of pedestrians to move. Daniel and Apollo fell in step, weaving around street vendors and families out for the afternoon. Inside, Daniel's heart raced at being pressed among so many bodies, but a gentle brush from Apollo's muzzle calmed the surge of tension. The dog had always been attuned to Daniel's spikes of anxiety. One glance, one quiet breath, and the pounding in Daniel's chest receded. At the apartment building's entrance, a child in the lobby squealed, "Look, Mommy, a police dog." The mother smiled nervously, unsure whether to allow her curious son to approach. Daniel managed a reassuring grin. "He's friendly, as long as you're gentle. The child patted Apollo's shoulder while Daniel carefully guided the boy's hand. Apollo stayed still, absorbing the attention without agitation. Moments like these reminded Daniel of everything this dog represented: a quiet hero, patient and steadfast, even after all they'd endured. Upstairs, the small studio greeted them with musty carpeting and a cluttered kitchenette. Marcus's furniture was sparse, just a worn couch, a tiny TV stand, and a table that might collapse if someone sneezed too hard. Yet Daniel felt relief wash over him. At least it was safe, warm, and had space for Apollo's dog bed near the window. Marcus himself was out on an errand, so Daniel took a moment to drop his duffel bag on the couch. Apollo circled a few times before lying down, eyes on Daniel as if confirming, "Are we staying?" "Yeah, boy," Daniel said quietly. "This is home for now." He had only a faint plan for the weeks to come. The Department of Veterans Affairs had assigned him a counselor to help with the transition, but Daniel was hesitant about therapy. He felt that as long as Apollo was at his side, he could handle nightmares and flashbacks on his own. Financially, he had savings, nothing extravagant, but enough to keep afloat for a few months. Another question loomed. Could he find a job that would let him keep Apollo close? The dog was now legally classified as a service animal, yet Daniel knew not every employer would understand. That evening, Marcus returned, arms laden with grocery bags. "You made it," he exclaimed, setting items on the rickety table. "Got us some supplies. Hope you like sandwiches, because that's about all I can make without burning something." He tossed a glance at Apollo, offering him a playful salute. "Welcome, soldier. Guess we're all bunking together." "Thanks, man," Daniel said, feeling the gratitude well up. He'd known Marcus since basic training, but they'd served in different units. Fate had made them cross paths at a VA event last month, and Marcus had insisted Daniel crash at his place whenever he needed. "I'll pay rent while I'm here, no arguments." Yeah, Marcus teased. "You can cover the electric bill or something. I'm just glad to help." He started unpacking lettuce, lunch meat, a loaf of bread. "So, how'd it go in court?" Daniel slumped into a chair, Apollo settling by his feet. "Better than expected. The judge ruled Apollo can stay with me under a service animal classification. I almost didn't believe it was happening. I thought for sure that I'd—" His voice caught, remembering the dread of that morning. Marcus nodded, spreading mustard onto bread. "That's the best news I've heard all week. Must feel like a big weight off, yeah?" "It does," Daniel admitted. "I'm not sure what's next. All I know is he's here. That's all that matters." They ate quietly, the overhead light buzzing intermittently. In the lull, Daniel's mind drifted to the desert again, how the nights were either freezing or blisteringly hot, how Apollo would curl at his feet whenever they found a moment of rest. He remembered the swirl of sand against a bleeding sunset, both of them exhausted yet unbroken. At times, he still half expected to wake in a tent with the distant rumble of military vehicles, but the hum of the old fridge reminded him he was nowhere near a war zone. He was in a tiny apartment, with peeling wallpaper, trying to figure out how to be a civilian. One day bled into the next. Daniel spent mornings scanning job postings and afternoons walking Apollo around the neighborhood. Sometimes they ventured to the local park, where children played tag and elderly couples fed breadcrumbs to ducks near a pond. Daniel found the quiet strolls therapeutic, a gentle routine that helped him fend off the nightmares lurking in his subconscious. If ever he faltered, Apollo would sense his tension and lean against him. The dog's presence had become a lifeline in more ways than Daniel could articulate. Midweek, an unexpected call came from a local outreach center run by a woman named Ms. Porter. Word had spread through a veterans network that Daniel might be looking for work. Ms. Porter ran a program to help homeless vets and their families get back on their feet. They needed a part-time assistant to coordinate supplies, manage donations, and occasionally help with counseling tasks. It wasn't glamorous, but Daniel saw promise in the role. Not only would it pay modestly, but Ms. Porter had no problem with Apollo coming along. "That's actually an advantage," Ms. Porter said over the phone, her voice warm and lively. "We've got folks here dealing with serious trauma. An animal can be a comfort. Why don't you come by tomorrow to check the place out?" Daniel agreed. After the call, he looked at Apollo with a tentative smile. "Guess we might have a new mission, bud." The next morning, Ms. Porter greeted them with a broad grin. She was a petite woman with curly gray hair, wearing a bright scarf and carrying an air of constant motion, as if her mind was always 3 steps ahead. The outreach center was housed in a refurbished brick building, its entrance decorated with colorful murals depicting unity and hope. Inside, mismatched chairs and tables filled a main hall where volunteers served coffee and pastries to anyone who walked in off the street. "Daniel, right?" Ms. Porter said, shaking his hand vigorously. "And who's this handsome partner?" She stooped to offer Apollo the back of her hand. Apollo sniffed, then accepted a gentle pat on the shoulders. "He's gorgeous," she said, standing up with a twinkle in her eyes. "We can definitely use your help, both of you. Lots of our vets miss the canine companionship they had in service, so a friendly face like Apollo's could do wonders." Daniel followed her on a tour. She showed him a storage room lined with shelves of canned goods, stacked bedding, racks of donated clothes, then a small office where they kept files on the individuals who came seeking help. Ms. Porter pointed out her meager staff, just 3 other paid positions and a handful of volunteers. Despite the limited resources, the place buzzed with positivity. "So the pay's not huge," Ms. Porter admitted, leading them back to the main hall. "But if you can give us 3 or 4 hours a day, we'll set you up. You'll help with intake paperwork, coordinate with local businesses for donations, that kind of thing. We also have group therapy sessions every Wednesday. If you're comfortable, you could share your experience or just be there with Apollo to support folks." Daniel's chest felt tight with gratitude. That sense of purpose, of having a mission again, sparked something inside him. "Yes, absolutely," he said, voice steady. "I'm in." He returned home that evening, describing the place to Marcus with a spark in his eyes. "It's no special ops mission, but I think it matters," he concluded. Marcus grinned, tipping an imaginary hat. "You're right, my friend. Sometimes these missions are the ones that matter most." Each passing day at the outreach center brought new stories. Daniel met a man who'd served in the Marines, now struggling with substance abuse. Another was a single mother who'd joined the Army Reserve for educational benefits, but came back to find her house foreclosed. Many were distrustful at first, speaking in guarded tones. Yet, they'd soften the moment Apollo trotted up, tail swishing in friendly greeting. Daniel saw firsthand how a gentle presence could break through barriers of shame or hopelessness. In counseling groups, participants often asked about Daniel's experiences with PTSD. Though he was hesitant to open up, feeling unqualified to advise anyone, his sincerity made an impact. Once, when a former medic wept recounting nightmares she couldn't escape, Apollo laid his head on her lap and the woman sobbed against his fur, releasing months of pent-up fear. Witnessing that quiet miracle, Daniel realized they were forging new paths of healing together. Meanwhile, finances remained precarious. Daniel's part-time pay couldn't stretch far, and he loathed depending on Marcus's goodwill. He'd begun searching for additional odd jobs, anything from driving deliveries to evening security gigs. Having Apollo with him was non-negotiable, but that requirement narrowed prospects. Still, Daniel pushed on, hoping that once he found his footing, he could secure a better situation for them both. One Saturday afternoon, Ms. Porter invited Daniel and Apollo to join a small local fundraiser. Hosted by a neighborhood coffee shop, it aimed to collect donations for the outreach center. The shop's cozy interior smelled of roasted beans and fresh pastries. A few tables were rearranged to accommodate a microphone where participants gave short talks. Daniel stood off to the side, not planning to speak, just letting Apollo mingle with friendly hands reaching to pet him. Then Ms. Porter took the mic. "We have someone here who understands firsthand how tough it can be for veterans coming back," she announced, gesturing for Daniel to step forward. He froze, uncertain. But the crowd clapped politely, so he cleared his throat and approached, Apollo at his side. He told them about the day he almost lost Apollo in court, about the judge who recognized the difference between a piece of property and a bond that saved a life. Emotion thickened his voice when he admitted how close he'd come to losing hope. Yet, at every step, Apollo had been there, nudging him back to the present, reminding him life was worth fighting for even when the battles were invisible. By the time he finished, the coffee shop was quiet, except for the hum of the espresso machine. Ms. Porter wiped her eyes. Then, the audience erupted in applause. That night, as Daniel prepared to leave the shop, a middle-aged man approached. He wore a baseball cap embroidered with a subtle eagle emblem and introduced himself as a small business owner. "I can't promise big hours," the man said, voice wavering with sincerity. "But I run a shipping warehouse. We could use help with inventory and shipping logs, and if you need to keep your dog by you, that's fine by me. My brother was a Marine. I know how important these dogs are." Daniel shook his hand firmly, gratitude lighting his features. "Thank you," he said, struggling for words. "That means a lot." On the way home, the city lights glimmered. He breathed in the crisp night air, heart lighter than it had been in ages. Life wasn't perfect, but it had direction. He was building a patchwork of part-time responsibilities, discovering that every small job gave him a chance to help others, or, at the very least, earn the money they needed to stay afloat. And he had Apollo, faithful, intuitive, resolute. Back in the apartment, Marcus dozed on the couch, the TV flickering with late-night news. Daniel tiptoed inside, stifling a yawn. Apollo trotted to his designated corner, curled up, and let out a soft huff of contentment. Daniel smiled, reaching over to switch off the lamp. He thought of the battles he'd faced abroad, the terror he had endured under starless skies, the exhaustion of so many missions. He also recalled stepping into that courthouse, convinced the system would strip him of his best friend, but the system hadn't. For once, fate had offered mercy. Maybe it was time to believe in the possibility of second chances. Settling onto the couch, Daniel closed his eyes. With Apollo close, sleep no longer felt like an enemy. Tomorrow they would return to the outreach center. Then, he'd meet that shipping warehouse manager about the new side job. Small steps, each one carrying him further from the nightmares of the past and closer to a life that made sense, one where the loyalty of a dog and the resilience of a soldier could blend into something hopeful. If this story continues to resonate, remember to like and subscribe and let us know your city in the comments below. Each life is shaped by chapters of hardship and hope. Sometimes all it takes is one loyal friend to see you through. Daniel woke earlier than usual the next day. A soft haze filtered through the makeshift curtains in Marcus's studio, illuminating Apollo curled at his feet. The dog's ears twitched at the faint noise of morning traffic, though he didn't stir. For a moment, Daniel simply watched the slow rhythm of Apollo's breathing. It comforted him in a way he never would have admitted in his old army days. Back then, stoicism was a badge of honor. Now, he realized genuine gratitude for each new dawn was far more valuable than a forced facade. He slipped out of bed, careful not to jostle Apollo, and limped quietly into the kitchenette. Though the nightmares had become less frequent, the old leg injury still announced itself with a dull ache whenever he first stood. Daniel brewed some coffee, ignoring the peeling wallpaper that threatened to drop flakes onto the countertop. The place might not have looked like much, but it sheltered him and gave Apollo a safe corner to rest. Nothing else mattered. While Daniel sipped from a mismatched mug, he mentally ran through his schedule. First stop, the outreach center to help sort new donations. Then an afternoon shift at the shipping warehouse. He'd only just begun the warehouse job, but it felt promising. He remembered the owner's handshake, firm, honest, and the immediate acceptance of Apollo walking alongside Daniel among the aisles of crates. The manager, a broad-shouldered man named Earl, had joked that Apollo's presence might even deter any would-be thieves. Daniel appreciated the warmth, a far cry from the critical glares he'd once braced himself for. Marcus's muffled snores filtered from the living area. Daniel assembled a quick breakfast, mindful of Apollo's curious sniffing. "You'll get your walk soon enough," Daniel murmured, tossing the dog a playful grin. In response, Apollo stretched, tail wagging in that slow, contented way. It was a small routine, but to Daniel, it felt like the start of a normal life. Each new routine, preparing coffee, walking the dog, heading to a job, became a gentle affirmation that he could be part of the civilian world, despite lingering ghosts of the past. They set out into a crisp morning, shoes tapping the pavement as they headed to the outreach center. Ms. Porter was there ahead of them, rummaging through boxes piled haphazardly near the entrance. She wore a bright orange scarf that clashed charmingly with her teal jacket, her signature swirl of motion already in full force. The moment she spotted them, her face lit up. "Daniel, Apollo, perfect timing. Some local folks dropped off 5 crates of canned goods earlier than expected. I could really use another pair of hands." "And paws?" Daniel teased, and she laughed, patting Apollo affectionately. They got to work, ferrying boxes into the storage room. Even that menial labor felt surprisingly uplifting. As they sorted through cans of soup and vegetables, Ms. Porter chatted about her plans for the upcoming holiday drive. "We want to serve a hot meal to any veteran or family in need," she explained, gesticulating excitedly. "A real proper feast, complete with roast turkey, homemade pies, the works." Daniel paused, a can of green beans in hand. "That's a big undertaking," he observed. "You sure we can manage it with such a small staff?" Her eyes danced with determination. "We'll figure it out, we always do. The key is rallying people's goodwill. Once they see the importance, they step up." Then she placed a can on the shelf, turning serious. "And Daniel, I want you to remember, we're not just here for the ones walking in off the streets. We're here for you too. If you ever need something, advice, a shoulder, anything, just say the word." Touched, he gave a small nod. "Thank you, truly." By midday, the outreach center buzzed with visitors. A couple of new volunteers arrived, and Ms. Porter introduced Daniel to each. One was a soft-spoken nursing student, the other a retired teacher who offered to help with reading programs. In the midst of the bustle, a man approached the sign-in table, wearing an old camouflage jacket and carrying a torn duffel bag. Daniel noticed the man's hesitant posture, the hollowness in his eyes, familiar signs of someone who'd fought battles no one else could see. Daniel greeted him gently, introducing himself and Apollo. Upon hearing Daniel's rank and background, the man exhaled in relief as though grateful to be among those who understood. They spoke quietly for several minutes. The man's name was Troy, an ex-Marine who'd fallen on hard times after leaving the service. He'd lost a job, then an apartment, and had no family to lean on. Ms. Porter joined them, her face filled with genuine concern as she offered resources, temporary shelter, job listings, and even counseling sessions, if Troy felt comfortable. Daniel accompanied Troy to a quieter corner where they drank black coffee from paper cups. At one point, Troy reached out to Apollo, letting the dog sniff his hand. A faint smile broke through the man's guarded expression. He reminds me of the K-9 my unit had overseas, Troy said. Sometimes I think I miss that dog more than anything else. Daniel nodded, recalling how the bond with Apollo had felt like an anchor in those chaotic times. He saved me too, he whispered, aware Troy would understand. They parted with a promise to catch up again the next day. Troy walked away with a set of addresses to check and a phone contact for Ms. Porter. Watching him go, Daniel felt that small spark of purpose rise again. This simple everyday effort, listening, empathizing, offering a supportive presence, mattered. The afternoon arrived and Daniel left for his shift at Earl's shipping warehouse. The building stood in an industrial zone near the outskirts, a place of concrete floors and steel shelves stacked high with boxes. Machines hummed and beeped. Forklift drivers maneuvered crates, and a row of overhead lights flickered in monotone brightness. Daniel clocked in, then guided Apollo along a corridor lined with shipping containers. Despite the flurry of activity, Apollo remained calm, stepping carefully around forklifts and ignoring the occasional dropped package that clattered on the floor. Earl greeted them near the loading dock. "Glad to see you back," he boomed, a warm grin in place. He wore a stained baseball cap and baggy jeans, but carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd built this operation from scratch. "We've got a backlog of inventory that needs scanning. Think you can handle that computer system I showed you?" Daniel nodded. "Shouldn't be a problem, and Apollo won't be in the way." "No worries," Earl said, patting the dog's shoulder. "He's good for morale. Employees love him." He directed Daniel to a station where digital scanners were lined up beside a row of battered laptops. "Just scan each barcode. Ensure it matches the manifest on the screen. If anything's off, let me know. Simple, yeah?" Daniel thanked him, settling in for the shift. Rows of boxes awaited, each with codes to be scanned and confirmed. The mechanical beep of the scanner soon became rhythmic, almost soothing in its repetition. Occasionally, Apollo would stand, circling Daniel's chair as though checking that everything was still all right. The dog's quiet vigilance was a reminder of the trust that existed between them, a trust no contract or court order could sever now. Time slipped by, and the busy hum of the warehouse continued unabated. But at one point, a sudden crash rang out a few aisles over. Daniel jumped, heart hammering as he instinctively ducked low. It was just a forklift mishap, no one harmed, but the sharp noise triggered a flash of memory, the thunder of mortar shells exploding around him, the whistle of debris. His breathing constricted, and for a moment the aisles blurred. Then he felt Apollo pressing against his leg, tail wagging softly as though to say, "You're here. You're safe." Closing his eyes, Daniel forced himself to breathe. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4, an old coping tactic. Apollo's presence helped anchor him. When he stood again, he noticed a coworker giving him a concerned glance, but no one pried. They returned to their tasks, letting the moment pass as seamlessly as it came. Daniel was grateful for that small kindness. By the end of his shift, he'd cleared a solid chunk of inventory. Earl gave him an appreciative nod. "You did great," he said. "Keep it up, and we might just make you a full-timer someday if you're up for it." Daniel mustered a soft grin, wiping sweat from his brow. "I'd like that." He didn't mention how part of him still felt restless, as if always on the lookout for the next hazard. Civilians around him seemed at ease in the routine of life. Daniel doubted he would ever fully share that. Yet working there with Apollo was the closest he'd come to feeling comfortable in a normal job environment. His route home involved another ride on public transit. This time, the bus was cramped with commuters heading back from downtown. Daniel found a seat near the door, Apollo calmly lying at his feet. A teenage girl across the aisle snapped a photo on her phone, perhaps capturing the unusual sight of a soldier with a dog on the bus. Daniel felt a stir of self-consciousness, but the girl smiled politely, offering a thumbs up. He nodded in return, thinking that maybe not all unexpected attention was bad. Back at Marcus's apartment, the living room was strewn with takeout containers. Marcus, rummaging through some forms, waved Daniel over. "I was going to mention, my cousin's buddy knows someone who's subletting a small place a few blocks from here. Apparently it's a ground floor unit with a decent yard. Pet-friendly, too." A spark of hope lit in Daniel's chest. He set down his messenger bag. "I'd love to check it out." Marcus rummaged for a scribbled address. "Here, maybe give him a call. I know you and Apollo could use more space. It's not 5-star, but it'll be better than this shoebox." Daniel gazed at the address, adrenaline thrumming. The possibility of a place of his own, a stable home for him and Apollo, felt like the next step on his path to rebuilding. "Thanks again," he said to Marcus. "You've done so much already." Marcus waved off the gratitude. "Don't mention it. We all need each other sometimes, no shame in that." He yawned. "I'm beat. Long day. You good?" Daniel nodded. He felt physically tired, but emotionally steady. After letting Apollo out for a brief walk, he settled onto the couch, drafting a text to the landlord about scheduling a visit. In the quiet that followed, the hum of possibility filled his thoughts. A real apartment, a consistent job, maybe even attending those therapy sessions Ms. Porter recommended. He'd always been hesitant about the label therapy, but the glimpses he'd seen, how it helped others, how it might help him, were shifting his attitude. As he drifted towards sleep, Daniel recalled the day's small victories. Troy's shy gratitude at the outreach center, the easy acceptance from co-workers at the warehouse, and now a potential new home. Each step felt like forging a new identity, still a soldier, always a soldier at heart, but also a man who could laugh, cry, and find purpose outside the chain of command. Above all, he had Apollo, the steadfast companion who bridged his past and present. The dog's quiet breathing was the last sound Daniel heard before the lull of sleep pulled him under. Morning brought a swirl of new tasks. Daniel phoned the landlord for the sublet. A woman's voice, warm but businesslike, explained the unit's details. "It's a compact one-bedroom," she said, "nothing fancy. But the rent is fair, and we allow large dogs as long as they're well-behaved. I can show it tomorrow afternoon. Does that work?" It did. After the call, Daniel readied himself and Apollo for another shift at the warehouse. The routine was starting to become second nature. Feed Apollo, gather his ID, head out the door, catch the bus 2 stops down. This time the warehouse was unusually quiet when they arrived. Earl met them in the main aisle, expression grim. "Got some news," he muttered. "We had a break-in last night." Daniel's gut tightened. "Really? I thought the security cameras were down somehow." Earl rubbed his forehead. "A few crates are missing. No sign of forced entry, so we suspect it might be an inside job. Police are on the way. Just a heads up." Daniel exchanged a worried glance with Apollo. Though he was just a part-time employee, that old protective instinct surged in his veins. Perhaps it was the soldier in him who wanted to unravel the mystery. He spent his shift on high alert, scanning corners, checking for anything out of place. He also kept an ear open for hushed chatter among co-workers. Most seemed genuinely concerned, but a few looked uneasy, as if fearful that suspicion might fall on them. The police arrived mid-shift, collecting statements and scanning the building. They asked Daniel the usual questions. Did he see anything suspicious before closing? Did anyone talk about the cameras? He told them he'd heard nothing out of the ordinary, but he'd remain watchful. By the time the day ended, the mood in the warehouse was tense. Earl apologized for the disruption. "Never had a problem like this before," he said, massaging the back of his neck. "Hate to think one of my own would do it." Walking away, Daniel sensed the leftover adrenaline from an all-too-familiar scenario, searching for clues, suspecting betrayal from within. It reminded him uncomfortably of times abroad, when internal threats and confusion plagued even the most cohesive units. Yet as he stepped onto the bus with Apollo, he forced himself to breathe. He was no longer in a war zone, and there was no imminent danger. If anything, he felt oddly determined to help find answers, though he wasn't sure how deeply he should get involved. That evening he drifted into the outreach center, hoping the calm environment might clear his head. Ms. Porter was there, coaxing a new mother into accepting some baby supplies. Daniel offered a small wave, then wandered into the main hall. He found Troy sitting at one of the tables, hunched over a notebook. The man looked up, eyes brightening at the sight of Apollo. "Hey," he murmured. "Didn't expect to see you this late." "Rough day at the warehouse," Daniel said, taking a seat. He told Troy a bit about the break-in, minus the details he didn't yet know. Troy listened with empathy, chewing his lip. "This city gets rough sometimes," he offered, "but you'll figure it out." Daniel nodded. "It just stirred up old stuff, I guess. I get jumpy whenever things feel unstable." He rubbed Apollo's neck. "This guy helps, but the worry still sneaks in." They talked for a while, sharing stories of restless nights and flashbacks that pounced without warning. The honesty felt like a release. Eventually, Ms. Porter joined them, placing steaming mugs of tea on the table. "You're not alone," she reminded Daniel gently, "and that's what matters most." As he walked back to the apartment, Daniel reflected on how far he'd come from that soldier stepping out of a transport plane, battered and uncertain. Life was still complicated. Nightmares, job stress, memories of the break-in echoing in his mind. But each day a quiet strength grew in him, fueled by those who believed in second chances. Standing outside the worn front door, he patted Apollo's back. "Tomorrow we see about that new place," he said. "Ready for the next step, buddy?" Apollo gave a soft bark as if to say, "Always." No matter the shadows of the past or the trials of the future, Daniel had found a path forward, guided by the unwavering loyalty at his side. If this journey has touched you, please remember to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. There's always more to discover in the next chapter of Rebuilding and Hope. Daniel barely slept, caught between excitement and nervous energy. Morning arrived like a gentle promise, sunlight filtering through the dingy studio windows. As he gathered Apollo's leash, his fingers trembled slightly. Today, he was supposed to visit the sublet Marcus had mentioned, a chance for a real home, something stable. Though apprehension gnawed at him, he forced himself to focus on the positives. After weeks of transitioning from the outreach center to part-time warehouse shifts, a permanent living space felt like the missing piece of a new start. Above all, it meant more room for Apollo to move freely, no longer confined to the corner of Marcus's cramped living space. Downstairs, he found the city just waking up. Delivery trucks hummed along the streets and a few early risers bustled into corner cafes. Daniel guided Apollo to a quieter side street, enjoying the crisp air as they walked toward the bus stop. Despite lingering fatigue, each step fanned a growing spark of optimism. They had survived deployment, countless nights of anxious sweats, even a legal battle. Finding a modest apartment should be simple by comparison. The sublet was located about 15 blocks away, in a neighborhood of older brick buildings interspersed with renovated condos. Some properties were meticulously landscaped, boasting tiny gardens in front, while others showed chipped paint and sagging porches. Daniel appreciated the area's unpolished charm. It reminded him that life, like these houses, carried scars but could still stand strong. Senses on alert, he checked the building numbers until reaching a small complex with a tall wrought iron fence. A gate buzzer asked for his name before letting him in. He walked through a courtyard, noticing a few potted plants and a collection of mismatched lawn chairs under a large oak tree. It was quiet, save for a distant radio playing upbeat tunes. Apollo trotted, tail raised, sniffing curiously. Their footsteps echoed slightly against the concrete path until an older woman in a cardigan stepped out onto a small patio, waving a friendly hand. "Daniel, yes? I'm Mary, the landlord's sister," she said, voice bright. "Carl asked me to show you around, hope you don't mind." "Not at all," Daniel replied, returning her smile. "Thanks for meeting us." Mary's gaze traveled to Apollo. "He's gorgeous," she remarked, stooping to offer her hand. Apollo sniffed politely, then accepted a gentle pat on his shoulder. "We had dogs here before," she explained, leading them through a short walkway. "As long as they're well behaved, we love having them. Brings life to the place." The unit was indeed compact. A single bedroom off a narrow living area, a tiny kitchen with dated appliances, and a bathroom whose floor tiles looked decades old. Still, it had large windows that let in natural light and a modest backyard that could accommodate a dog's playtime. Daniel ran a hand over the peeling kitchen counter, imagining Apollo sunbathing near the sliding glass door. It felt like a far cry from the musty corners of Marcus's apartment. Mary stepped back to give him space to look around. "Don't let the old fixtures fool you," she joked. "The plumbing and electricity work just fine. Carl's replaced them in the last few years, and the neighbors are friendly. We do barbecues once a month in the courtyard." "I like it," Daniel said, trying not to reveal too much eagerness. "I'm looking for something stable where I won't have to move in a few months. My service dog and I need a place that feels like home." Mary nodded, compassion in her eyes. "I heard a bit about your situation from Marcus's cousin. You've served, and now you're working at that outreach center, right?" He ran a thumb along Apollo's collar. "Yes, and also part-time at a warehouse. I'm hoping to merge the two into full-time stable work soon." He hesitated, letting out a breath. "I might not have an extensive rental history. I've been on base or living with friends, but I can provide references from my employers, if that helps." Mary gave him a reassuring nod. "We can figure out the formalities. I'm sure Carl will want a month's security deposit, and we'll do a quick background check. But from the looks of it, you'd be a fine tenant. When were you hoping to move in?" Daniel's heart fluttered at how smoothly this was going. "As soon as possible," he admitted. "My friend's been kind to let me stay, but I don't want to overstay my welcome." "All right," she said, smiling broadly. "Then I'll have Carl drop by tomorrow for the paperwork. Sound good?" He nodded, a wave of relief washing over him. They walked back into the courtyard. Apollo sniffed the grass by the oak tree, while Mary explained a bit more about the community. Across the way, a young couple peeked out from a balcony, waving politely. Daniel and Apollo waved back, a gentle warmth filling his chest. This sense of neighborhood, of belonging, reminded him of times before the army, when life was simpler, obligations fewer, and the future still open. Returning to the street, Daniel found himself grinning. With each step, he pictured how he might arrange furniture or where Apollo's bed would go. He fantasized about cooking actual meals in a real kitchen. No more precariously balanced hot plates. Even the chipped paint felt inviting, carrying the promise of personal touches he could make in time. If all went well, in just a matter of days, they'd have a place to call their own. That afternoon, he reported to the warehouse. Earl was near the entrance, clutching a clipboard, brow furrowed. "Hey, buddy," Earl greeted, though his tone was subdued. "Glad you're here. Police came back earlier, wanting to interview a few more folks about the break-in. I told them you'd probably cooperate if needed." "Of course," Daniel replied, scanning the rows of towering shelves. "Any updates?" Earl pressed his lips together. "They're suspecting an employee might have tampered with the cameras. We had a major shipment stolen, and we're talking thousands in losses. I'd hate to believe it's someone on this team, but the evidence points that way. Daniel glanced at Apollo, who tilted his head as though catching the tension. "I'll keep my eyes open," Daniel said. "I know it's not my job to investigate, but if I notice anything off, I'll let you know." Earl mustered a wan smile. "Appreciate it. We're short-handed enough as it is. Last thing I need is a traitor." He patted Daniel on the shoulder. "Go ahead and start scanning crates in aisle 5. We're counting on you." Walking through the warehouse, Daniel sensed the morale had shifted. Conversations were hushed, and employees seemed cagey. Any sense of camaraderie was overshadowed by suspicion. Daniel stuck to his tasks, focusing on each beep of the scanner, but the tension prickled at him. More than once, he caught Apollo looking up with concern. While scanning, Daniel noticed a coworker named Jake loitering. Jake, a wiry man with darting eyes, lingered behind a tower of crates, fiddling with his phone. Their gazes met briefly, and Jake offered a half-smile before slipping out of sight. Daniel had seldom spoken with Jake. The man rarely engaged with anyone. Daniel shrugged off the odd moment, though a hint of unease lingered. Over the next few hours, a steady stream of inventory checks filled Daniel's schedule. By the time he was done, he felt a faint ache in his injured leg, a reminder of old wounds. He found Earl by the loading dock, flipping through shipping manifests. "Heading out," Daniel said. "Anything else you need?" Earl shook his head. "We're good, but hey, thanks for the hustle. And if you see anything, well, you know." Daniel nodded. The ride home was uneventful. A half-full bus jostled over city potholes while Apollo lay quietly. At Marcus's apartment, he sank onto the couch, removing his boots with a groan. Marcus, who was sorting laundry, raised an eyebrow. "Long day?" "Yeah," Daniel sighed. "But guess what? I think I found a place. Should get the official go-ahead tomorrow." Marcus flashed a thumbs up. "That's fantastic. You deserve your own spot. This place is fine for a while, but I bet you'll feel better with more privacy." "Exactly," Daniel agreed. He and Apollo went for a brief walk before bedtime, winding down quiet streets. Under the glow of street lamps, Daniel contemplated how drastically life had changed in a short span. Yet, he felt grounded by each new step. By the time he returned, he was exhausted, sleep tugging him under. The next day, he swung by the outreach center. Ms. Porter was organizing flyers for the upcoming holiday feast. She brightened upon seeing him and Apollo. "We might break a record for attendance this year," she announced, beckoning him over. "The sign-up sheet is filling fast. We'll need plenty of volunteers." Daniel picked up a flyer. Large, bold lettering invited the community to a free holiday dinner for veterans and families in need. "Count me in," he said. "I can help coordinate or serve meals, whatever you need." Ms. Porter nodded, grateful. "I also want to invite Troy to help," she added, scanning the hall for any sign of him. "He's been making good progress, even found some part-time work at a car wash. I believe letting him assist might boost his confidence." They found Troy tidying a table in one corner. Ms. Porter cheerfully offered him the volunteering slot. Troy's shoulders straightened, eyes flickering with pride. "I'd be honored," he replied quietly. "Means a lot to be useful." Before Daniel left for the warehouse, Ms. Porter pulled him aside. "How are you holding up? You look tired." He considered her question, Apollo by his side. "I've been better, but I'm also hopeful," he admitted. "Found a possible apartment. Fingers crossed we can sign the papers today." Her face lit up. "Wonderful news. Keep me posted. And remember, don't overextend yourself if you need rest. Serving others is noble, but you have to take care of you." He thanked her and headed out. At the warehouse, another day of methodical scanning awaited, but upon arrival, he found Earl in a heated conversation with two police officers near the front desk. Daniel hesitated, not wanting to intrude, yet Earl waved him over. The officers turned, their expressions neutral but inquisitive. One introduced himself as Detective Shane, a stout man with a measured voice. "We're following up on leads regarding the stolen goods," he explained. "We've got reason to believe a staff member orchestrated the break-in. Earl says you're ex-military and good with details. Mind answering some questions?" Daniel's posture stiffened. "Sure. What do you need?" The detective pulled out a small notebook. "Did you notice any suspicious behavior before or after the incident? Anyone messing with cameras or asking odd questions?" Daniel thought for a moment. His mind flicked to Jake lurking behind crates, but nothing specifically incriminating had happened. "Not exactly," he replied. "There's a guy named Jake who keeps to himself. I saw him using his phone a lot on the warehouse floor, but that might be nothing." Detective Shane made a note. "All right, we'll talk to him. Anything else? Hunches? Strange events?" Daniel shrugged, uneasy. He didn't want to cast blame without proof. "Not that I can recall." The detective thanked him and moved on to interview other employees. Earl clapped Daniel on the shoulder. "I hate seeing cops here, but it's necessary. Appreciate you being honest." As Daniel resumed scanning, he sensed more eyes on him than usual. He caught glimpses of co-workers glancing his way, maybe wondering what he might have told the police. The tension felt reminiscent of a covert operation where trust was scarce and suspicion high. Apollo, sensing Daniel's discomfort, stayed close. At one point, the dog gently nudged Daniel's arm, a silent reminder to breathe and remain grounded. Daniel stroked Apollo's head, whispering thanks. When his shift ended, Daniel stepped outside, only to find a man leaning against the building's side wall. It was Jake, hands jammed in pockets, gaze flicking nervously. "Heard you talk to the cops," Jake said in a tight tone. Daniel halted, steadying his voice. "They asked everyone questions, nothing personal." Jake let out a shaky exhale. "Man, I've got nothing to do with the break-in, okay? If they're pointing fingers at me, it's because I look like an easy target. I can't afford to lose this job. I got bills, a sick mother. You get it?" Daniel softened. "Look, I only mentioned you seemed jumpy. I never said you were guilty. But if you're innocent, you've got nothing to worry about." Jake's expression seemed torn between fear and relief. "I just don't want trouble. Times are hard, you know." Daniel nodded. "I get it. Keep your head up. The truth will come out." Jake offered a reluctant nod in return, then slipped away. Daniel walked to the bus stop, the whole encounter leaving a sour taste in his mouth. He knew what it felt like to be under suspicion, to fear losing everything. He hoped the investigation ended swiftly, restoring a semblance of normalcy for everyone. Late that evening, Carl, the landlord, called. In a few brief minutes, he and Daniel confirmed the sublet arrangements. "Tomorrow morning, drop by the office to sign papers," Carl said, his tone brisk but polite. "Bring your ID and references and we'll finalize. Welcome aboard." Relief coursed through Daniel as though a knot in his chest loosened. He hung up, turning to Apollo with a grin. "We did it, boy. We've got our own place." The dog wagged his tail, excitement mirrored in his bright gaze. Marcus, overhearing, let out a celebratory whoop. "All right, you'll finally be free from this little cave. We should toast." He rummaged through the fridge, emerging with 2 cans of cheap soda. Handing one to Daniel, they tapped cans, the metal clink sounding like a quiet, joyous bell. "To your new home." Daniel sipped the soda, leaning his head back against the wall, letting the realization sink in. For months he'd lived in limbo, fighting for Apollo, searching for a job, couch surfing. And now the glimmer of a stable life stood before him. Yes, there was still the warehouse fiasco to worry about, the challenge of balancing finances, and the shadows of PTSD lurking. But each victory felt like a foothold on the climb upward. He texted Ms. Porter the news, then Troy, letting them know he'd have an address to update soon. Both replied with warm congratulations. Sleep came more easily that night, buoyed by optimism. Apollo curled up beside him on the couch, a gentle reminder of how far they'd come. Daniel drifted off, dreamless, unburdened for once by the weight of the past. Morning arrived and he hurried to Carl's small office, an annex off the courtyard. Within minutes, Daniel was signing paperwork, scanning the lease terms, verifying the modest rent. Carl took copies of Daniel's references, glancing over them with a satisfied nod. "Looks good. Keys are yours as soon as the deposit clears. Move in whenever you like." Daniel clutched the keys in his palm, heart fluttering. "Thank you," he said, voice thick with gratitude. They shook hands. He walked away, excitement thrumming through his limbs. The day was bright, the world brimming with possibility. Sure, the place had outdated fixtures and a scuffed yard, but it was his. The first real home base he'd set up post-deployment, a place for him and Apollo to shape a new life. If you've been following Daniel and Apollo's journey and want to see where life takes them next, be sure to like, subscribe, and comment your hometown below. You never know what new challenges or moments of hope await. Daniel set the newly minted keys on the old kitchen counter, a faint grin crossing his face. The sublet's chipped paint and vintage appliances no longer mattered. It was a place all his own, albeit modest. Apollo sniffed every corner, tail wagging in approval. In the living area, Daniel unfolded a second-hand futon Marcus had helped him haul across town, wincing at a squeak from its metal frame. The move had been swift, and though the boxes were stacked in haphazard towers, Daniel felt contentment he hadn't experienced in years. This was his sanctuary, carved out of adversity. Early sunlight spilled through the windows, revealing dust motes dancing in the beams. Outside, a neighbor's radio played a nostalgic tune, the melody seeping through the thin walls. Daniel breathed in slowly, savoring the unfamiliar sense of ownership. No more worrying about intruding on Marcus, no more living as a guest. He and Apollo could finally settle, creating routines on their terms. A flutter of nerves mingled with excitement. He hadn't furnished a home since before his last deployment. That memory felt like another lifetime. He spent the first few hours unpacking essentials, a small stash of clothes, a box of mismatched dishes, some personal keepsakes. Photographs from his military service remained tucked away at the bottom of a trunk. Although he treasured them, he wasn't ready to hang reminders of war on these fresh walls. Instead, he placed a single-frame photo on the counter. Apollo and him, snapped during a rare, carefree moment overseas. In the picture, both looked dusty and exhausted, yet somehow triumphant. Daniel ran a thumb over the frame and smiled. Around mid-morning, a knock sounded at the door. Daniel opened it cautiously to see Mary, the landlord's sister, who had shown him the place. She held a plate of homemade cookies. "Figured you might need a pick-me-up," she said, beaming. Apollo sidled over, sniffing the air with obvious interest. "You too, buddy," Mary laughed, bending to scratch behind his ears. Daniel thanked her warmly, touched by the neighborly gesture. It reminded him that not everyone in the city was lost in the shuffle. Some still made an effort to connect. He offered Mary a quick tour. She peered at the stacks of boxes, nodding in approval at his plans for a small reading nook by the window. When her gaze fell upon the old trunk in the corner, Daniel noticed a flicker of curiosity in her expression. She didn't pry, though. She simply admired the brightness of the unit before returning to her own tasks. Once she was gone, Daniel sank onto the futon with a cookie, letting Apollo sample a crumb. A wave of gratitude washed over him. He couldn't recall the last time someone outside his circle of army buddies offered such kindness. After lunch, he organized Apollo's supplies, dog food, bedding, an assortment of chew toys. Everything found its place, albeit modestly, in the small kitchen nook. Daniel reflected on how only a few months ago he feared losing Apollo for good. Now the dog lounged contentedly, as though aware they had crossed a critical threshold. Tomorrow, the hustle of work would resume, hours at the outreach center and the warehouse. But for this moment, he allowed himself the luxury of calm. As the afternoon sun began its descent, Daniel grabbed his phone to text Ms. Porter about his new address. She replied with a string of exclamation points and a promise to visit soon. Troy also chimed in, sending a simple message. "Congrats, man. Proud of you. Keep going." Daniel felt his chest tighten with appreciation. Friends had come in unexpected forms since his return to civilian life, forging connections out of shared struggle. The sense of camaraderie gave him another anchor. The following morning, Daniel awoke to the unfamiliar quiet of his new surroundings. Even the floor's coolness under his feet felt different. After a quick shower, water pressure was low but functional, he fed Apollo and prepared to head to the outreach center. Ms. Porter had mentioned something about a volunteer orientation for the upcoming holiday dinner. Daniel grabbed a jacket, then paused to let his gaze sweep around the apartment. He liked seeing Apollo's bed in the corner, the futon neatly made. Each detail reminded him this was their place, shaped by their hands and choices. At the outreach center, the energy soared. Boxes of donated turkeys arrived, volunteers bustled in and out, and Ms. Porter orchestrated everyone like a maestro leading an orchestra. The holiday dinner was in 3 days, and last-minute details demanded careful coordination. As Daniel entered, carrying a batch of canned vegetables from a local drive, Ms. Porter waved him over. "Just in time," she said, gesturing to a group around a large table. "We're assigning roles." He joined the circle of volunteers, spotting Troy near the back. The ex-Marine offered a nod of greeting. A young nursing student introduced herself as Maria, explaining she'd handle basic health checks if needed. 2 older women volunteered to manage the dessert station. Ms. Porter placed Daniel in charge of crowd organization and dog therapy, a role that brought a smile to his face. Apollo would roam gently among guests, offering canine comfort to veterans who might be uneasy in large gatherings. They spent an hour mapping out the evening's flow, greeting arrivals, serving dinner, allocating space for kids to play. Ms. Porter assigned Troy to a quiet station near the entrance, welcoming everyone with a warm greeting and a small gift bag of toiletries and socks. Troy's cheeks reddened at the trust placed in him. Afterward, Daniel asked how he felt. Troy shrugged but couldn't hide a growing sense of pride. "It's good to be part of something," he admitted. Later, Daniel slipped into Ms. Porter's office to finalize some paperwork. She noticed his expression and asked, "How's the new place?" He couldn't help smiling. "Better than I imagined. It's small but comfortable and the neighbors are kind. I can't thank you enough for encouraging me to keep moving forward." She patted his arm. "You did this on your own, Daniel. I just cheered from the sidelines. Now focus on building your life there. We'll always be here if you need anything." Leaving the center, Daniel felt an uplifting sense of purpose. Even the sky seemed clearer. He headed to the warehouse, anticipating another day of scanning inventory. Yet the minute he walked inside, tension crackled. Earl stood near the front with 2 police officers. Behind them, Daniel glimpsed Jake in handcuffs, face pale. Detective Shane was there, flipping through notes. As Daniel neared, Earl shook his head gravely. "They found stolen goods in Jake's trunk," Earl explained quietly, once the detective stepped aside. "He claims it wasn't him, that someone set him up, but the evidence is pretty strong." A knot twisted in Daniel's stomach. Though Jake had acted nervously, Daniel never truly believed he was guilty. Observing the scene, he saw the heartbreak in Jake's eyes, a frantic denial that made Daniel wonder if there was more to the story. Still, the police had a job to do. Detective Shane ushered Jake out the door, and a hush descended among the remaining workers. Earl turned to Daniel, exhaling. "Hate to see it end like this, but at least we'll have closure. Could have hurt our business long term." Daniel nodded stiffly. memories of betrayal from his army days flashing through his mind. Sometimes, the person you suspected was just a scapegoat, while the real orchestrator slipped by. He reminded himself not to let old paranoia resurface. This was a civilian matter, and the law seemed to have found its culprit. Even so, an uneasy feeling lingered. He spent the shift in a fog, performing tasks by rote. Apollo sensed Daniel's unrest, staying close while Daniel repeated the usual scanning routine. Occasionally, a co-worker might whisper a rumor about Jake, but no one seemed truly certain. Some believed he was part of a larger scheme. Others pitied him for being reckless. Daniel kept his thoughts to himself, quietly observing the warehouse's subtle changes. Employees more guarded, corners now fitted with new cameras, the jovial camaraderie all but gone. That night, stepping into his new apartment felt like crossing into a calm harbor after rough seas. He removed his jacket, letting out a long sigh. Apollo patted over with a soft huff. "I know," Daniel murmured. "Feels off, right?" The dog tilted his head, as though sharing the sentiment. Daniel took a hot shower, letting the steam soothe taut muscles. Afterward, he checked his phone messages. One from Marcus. "Heard about Jake. You okay?" Another from Troy. "Meeting tomorrow to finalize holiday dinner details. You coming?" Daniel responded to both, then realized he had a missed call from an unknown number. The voicemail was short, referencing papers from a Sergeant Rogers that needed his attention. The mention of Rogers knotted his stomach. Rogers had always championed the official stance that Apollo was property, back when the court case loomed. Daniel thought that chapter was over. He tried to ignore the pang of anxiety, focusing instead on his progress. The apartment was a secure base. He had an income, however modest, and he was forging a sense of normalcy. But the voicemail cast a shadow. Could Rogers be seeking to reopen the custody battle for Apollo? Or was it unrelated? Determined not to let it spoil his evening, Daniel fixed a simple dinner, grilled chicken and steamed vegetables. Apollo lounged contentedly on his new dog bed, occasionally perking up at the scent of food. After they ate, Daniel set about reorganizing a few boxes. He discovered old letters stuffed in an envelope marked, "Do not read unless ready." They were from a friend who hadn't made it home. A wave of grief nearly overwhelmed him. Quickly, he sealed the envelope, deciding to revisit those memories another day. When the weight of the day grew too heavy, Daniel stepped outside to the small backyard. The moon hung low, casting pale light over a fence and a thin strip of grass. Apollo followed, sniffing at shadows. A few crickets chirped, and the faint hum of city traffic hummed beyond. Daniel leaned against the fence, letting the night air soothe his thoughts. He could almost pretend this small yard was an oasis, far from violence or heartbreak. He recalled Ms. Porter's gentle advice, "Serve others, but take care of yourself too." It struck him that, in all his efforts to rebuild, he'd neglected his own mental well-being. Sure, he carried on, found new tasks, made new friends, but the deeper wounds, those might need more than time and Apollo's steady presence. Maybe it was time to seek professional counseling or at least attend a session with the center's therapist. The notion scared him, but the alternative, bottling everything inside, proved riskier every time a loud noise triggered flashbacks. Before heading in, Daniel gazed at the stars. Fewer were visible against the city lights, yet the few that shone reminded him of nights in the desert. Apollo brushed his leg, bringing him back to the present. "It's different now," Daniel murmured, patting the dog's flank. "We have this place, and maybe we can really find peace." Inside, he locked up, tidied the small kitchen, and settled into bed. For a moment, he imagined a day when the nightmares stopped, when each dawn arrived with hope instead of worry. He pictured Apollo bounding around a yard with soft grass, no longer wearing the weight of battlefield memories. That image buoyed him toward sleep. If this unfolding chapter speaks to you, please remember to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Daniel's journey continues, one small victory at a time, reminding us that even after the darkest nights, dawn still brings warmth and light. The next morning dawned overcast, gray clouds clinging low as if reluctant to break. Daniel stirred in his small bedroom, sheets tangled around his legs. Across the room, Apollo lay in a patch of muted light, ears pricking the moment Daniel woke. He stood, stretching carefully, mindful of the dull pull in his healing leg. The radio he'd brought from Marcus's place sputtered faint music, filling the air with a soft, comforting backdrop. Today, Daniel had no warehouse shift. Earl had given him time off after the chaos of Jake's arrest, insisting employees deserved a mental breather. That left Daniel free to help finalize plans for the holiday dinner at the outreach center, yet the voicemail about papers from Sergeant Rogers nagged at him, a quiet worry beneath his newly found stability. He resolved to address it soon, just not before the dinner. The event was too important to risk overshadowing with negative news. He dressed in casual jeans and a light jacket, then prepared Apollo's breakfast. The dog ate calmly, tail wagging each time Daniel passed within petting distance. Daniel felt a flicker of gratitude for such unwavering companionship. After rinsing the dishes, he grabbed his phone, flipping through the number that had left the voicemail. It was from an unknown area code, one that he recognized vaguely as connected to a military office out of state. He couldn't bring himself to return the call. Not yet. Outside, the wind bit sharper than expected, sending a chill through his jacket. Daniel zipped up and they headed toward the nearest bus stop. The holiday dinner would take place that very evening in the Outreach Center's large communal hall. Ms. Porter had orchestrated a small miracle, donated turkeys, homemade pies, vegetables, and even a station for children's crafts. Daniel's chest swelled at the thought of veterans, young and old, finally feeling a sense of belonging on a night that could otherwise be lonely. When he arrived, Ms. Porter directed him to a storage room lined with sacks of potatoes and giant bags of stuffing mix. "Glad you're here," she exclaimed, balancing a clipboard and wearing a chef's apron, though she was no cook herself. "We need to prep these vegetables pronto, or we'll never have them ready by dinner time. Can Apollo keep watch so no one steals the sweet potatoes?" She joked with a playful twinkle in her eye. Daniel chuckled, rolling up his sleeves. "We're on it." He led Apollo to a spot near the door, then started peeling potatoes alongside a few volunteers. The rhythmic scrape of peelers on potato skins seemed oddly soothing. Around them, people chatted about their plans, the families expected, and the possibility of leftover food to distribute in care packages. Troy passed by with an armload of tablecloths, greeting Daniel with a smile that hinted at real optimism. Bit by bit, the afternoon slipped away in a flurry of kitchen tasks. Volunteers darted between rooms, stirring gravy, arranging chairs, and stacking plates. Apollo greeted each visitor gently, weaving around the bustle without complaint. Whenever Daniel finished one task, Ms. Porter appeared with another. By late afternoon, the hall was taking shape, a cluster of long tables, each with chairs on both sides, plus a corner set aside for children, complete with coloring books and crayons. Yet beneath the excitement, Daniel noticed some veterans pacing the corridors, looking tense. He recognized that unease. Large social events, even well-intentioned ones, could trigger anxiety in those who'd served. Daniel tried to approach them casually, offering a word or two of reassurance, letting them stroke Apollo's fur if they wished. Sometimes all it took was that gentle canine presence to break down guarded expressions. He understood better than most that feeling of being out of place in civilian gatherings. As the sun dipped, the center's doors opened to the first guests. Many arrived with hesitant smiles, scanning the hall for signs of safety. A volunteer offered name tags and ushered them to seats, Laughter broke out now and then when old comrades recognized each other unexpectedly. Ms. Porter, beaming, directed everyone toward the buffet. The aroma of roasted turkey and spiced pumpkin pie filled the air, mingling with the hum of conversation. Daniel positioned himself near Troy at the entrance. They greeted each newcomer, handing out small care packages that included toiletries, gloves, and a heartfelt note from Ms. Porter's organization. Troy seemed more relaxed than Daniel had ever seen him, shoulders no longer rigid with tension. "It's going well," Troy whispered between arrivals, offering Daniel a grin. "I never imagined I'd help host something like this." "It's an amazing turnout," Daniel replied, surveying the tables. Almost every seat was filled with veterans, families, and a few local donors. At the far side, kids crowded around a volunteer who helped them trace outlines of turkeys on construction paper. Amid that cheerful bustle, Daniel spotted one figure standing by the wall, an older man, hair cropped close, wearing a faded Marine Corps jacket. Something about his posture screamed that he felt out of place. Nudging Troy, Daniel whispered, "I'll be right back." He headed over, Apollo in tow. Up close, the man's eyes flicked nervously between Daniel and the crowd. Daniel offered a gentle smile. "Welcome. I'm Daniel, and this is Apollo. Can I show you around?" The man's mouth twitched in a hint of gratitude, though uncertainty lingered. Daniel recognized that storm of emotions, the push and pull of wanting connection, but fearing exposure. Eventually, the man allowed Daniel to guide him to a seat near a friendly group. Apollo sat by his feet, and Daniel explained the meal process, ensuring the man knew he was free to leave any time if he felt overwhelmed. Relieved, the man muttered a quiet thanks, patting Apollo's shoulder before Daniel stepped away. At last, Ms. Porter called for everyone's attention. Standing at a makeshift podium, she spoke in a warm tone. "We're so glad you all could join us tonight. This is more than just a meal. This is community, a place to share stories, find friendship, and remind ourselves that no one's truly alone." Applause rippled through the hall, subdued but heartfelt. Enjoy the food, take what you need, and know you're always welcome here. When dinner commenced, Daniel helped carry plates to those with limited mobility, occasionally kneeling to offer Apollo's comforting presence to anyone who seemed uneasy. He was struck by how many faces lit up when they saw Apollo. For some, a dog represented memories of simpler times, or the steadfast companionship they once knew in the service. In a way, it felt as though Apollo was bridging countless invisible gaps. Halfway through the meal, Daniel paused for breath in a corner, sipping from a paper cup of water. He glanced around, heart swelling at the sight of so many people who might otherwise be home alone, now gathered in mutual warmth. Troy caught his eye, giving a thumbs up from across the room. Ms. Porter bustled through with 2 volunteers in tow, carrying more trays of stuffing. Even the kids seemed to glow with excitement, or maybe just sugar from the pies. Then the front door opened. Daniel noticed a tall silhouette stepping inside, pausing uncertainly. The figure wore neat civilian attire, but his posture signaled a military background, straight-backed, scanning the environment. Something about him gnawed at Daniel's memory. Then it clicked. Sergeant Rogers. The same voice from that dreaded phone call months ago, the man once adamant that Apollo be reassigned. Daniel's stomach lurched. Why would Rogers show up here? Apollo sensed Daniel's sudden tension, pressing gently against his leg. With a steadying breath, Daniel approached. Rogers removed his cap, revealing silvering hair. He looked around, confusion flickering in his eyes. "I didn't expect this," Rogers said quietly, gaze sweeping over the bustling dinner scene. "I heard about a holiday event for veterans. Thought I'd see what it was about." Daniel kept his voice neutral. "We're hosting this dinner for anyone who needs a warm meal or good company. Surprised to see you here, Sergeant." Rogers shifted awkwardly. I recently transferred to a local reserve unit. Heard your name come up at the VA. His eyes flicked to Apollo, who stared back calmly. Seems the judge let you keep the dog after all. Daniel bristled at the mention of the dog. But tonight wasn't about grudges. Yeah, and we're fine. He gestured around. You're welcome to join the meal if that's what you need. Rogers hesitated, a swirl of regret crossing his face. Look, I never meant to sabotage you, Brooks. I followed the protocol. After that hearing, I tried to stay out of your way, but now... He trailed off, stuffing his cap under an arm. I just wanted to see how you were doing, and maybe talk about some paperwork left unresolved at the old post. Daniel eyed him warily. He couldn't ignore the curiosity in Rogers' tone, nor the subtle note of apology. Sure, he said, nodding toward a quieter corner. Let's talk. He guided Rogers away from the main tables. Apollo stayed close, tension in the air. At a small side table, Rogers rubbed his temples. After your discharge, some follow-up forms for service dog designation never got filed. I found them in a stack when I took over from Captain Morales. Basically, the Army never officially updated Apollo's status. It's incomplete. Daniel's heart pounded. Meaning? Meaning, Rogers replied quietly, that if it's not finalized, some overzealous bean counter might challenge your legal custody again. It's a slim chance, but I wanted you to be aware. I brought the papers. He patted a folder in his jacket. You sign these, I countersign, we file them with the right office, and Apollo is permanently recognized as your service dog. No more questions. Daniel's tension eased, replaced by cautious relief. He hadn't expected Rogers to do him any favors. Why help me now? Rogers gave a tired shrug. I guess I realize the Army has enough to deal with without meddling in a soldier's recovery. You were an excellent soldier, Brooks. I respected you, even if it didn't seem that way. And I know the bond with your dog ran deeper than typical protocol. His gaze lingered on Apollo, who stared back, ears tilted forward. Truth is, I regret how I handled it. For a moment, Daniel remained silent, studying the older man's lined face. Pride still etched Rogers' posture, yet there was a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. Daniel guessed that carrying the weight of bureaucracy must not have been easy either. I appreciate it, he said softly. Let's finalize those forms, then enjoy the meal. Sound good? A small, grateful smile tugged at Rogers' lips. That would be nice. They settled at a nearby table, Rogers retrieving the folder. Daniel skimmed the pages. Standard forms reaffirming Apollo's role in Daniel's rehabilitation, clarifying that the dog was released from further duty under government contract. Rogers produced a pen, and Daniel signed, heart hammering, as if sealing a final victory in an unseen battle. Once done, Rogers nodded, tucking the forms carefully away. You should make copies, Rogers reminded. Keep them with you, just in case. I will, Daniel promised, exhaling. Thank you, Sergeant. Rogers stood, glancing at the bustling hall. A shy humility touched his voice. Mind if I grab a plate? Haven't eaten since this morning. Be my guest, Daniel said, forcing a small smile. We've got plenty. That's the point. He led Rogers toward the buffet line, ignoring the flutter of apprehension in his stomach. Another step toward letting old tensions fade. The rest of the evening passed in a glow of shared laughter and occasional tears. Veterans swapped stories, some heartbreakingly raw, others laced with dark humor. Ms. Porter organized a short open mic, allowing anyone who wished to speak. Troy bravely stepped up, voice trembling, to thank the center for giving him a second chance. He singled out Daniel and Apollo for encouraging him to reconnect with life. Applause swelled, some folks wiping their eyes. Rogers sat at a corner table, quietly eating turkey and listening. He locked eyes with Daniel across the room once or twice, and though they didn't speak further, a silent understanding passed between them. Sometimes bridging a divide required only the smallest gesture of compassion. By the time the last plates were cleared, exhaustion weighed on everyone. The hall thinned out as guests drifted home. Ms. Porter, her hair disheveled, sank into a chair, letting out a long breath. "We served nearly 100 people," she marveled. "Thanks to you, Daniel, and Apollo too. We couldn't have managed without your help." Troy stacked chairs, whistling softly. Daniel caught him by the arm, giving a brief grin. "Proud of you for stepping up tonight. Feels good, right?" "Yeah," Troy said, lips curving into a rare full smile. "Feels real good." Once cleanup finished, Ms. Porter announced that leftover meals would be wrapped and delivered to nearby shelters. Daniel stuck around until the last tray was stored. Rogers had quietly slipped out, presumably to file the papers. Part of Daniel felt a weight lifting. Maybe that final piece of bureaucracy was now behind him. Stepping outside, Daniel discovered the night had turned crisp. Stars sparkled overhead, free from the earlier clouds. He stood a moment on the sidewalk, Apollo by his side. People emerged in twos and threes, exchanging goodbyes. Troy waved from across the street, heading for a bus stop. Ms. Porter locked up behind them, yawning. The day had been long but fulfilling. Daniel strolled home, breath frosting in the chilly air. Apollo trotted, occasionally glancing up. Despite the ache in his feet, Daniel felt lighter than ever. In a single evening, he'd witnessed transformation in others. Troy finding confidence, that older Marine pushing past fear, Rogers making amends, and Daniel himself, forging a final closure for Apollo's status. When they reached the apartment, Daniel shuffled inside and collapsed on the futon, letting out a satisfied groan. "We did good, huh?" he murmured to Apollo, who hopped onto his dog bed. The swirl of the holiday dinner, the warm gratitude of the guests, still glowed in Daniel's mind. Tomorrow, new challenges might arise, warehouse uncertainties, personal doubts, but for now, he allowed hope to cradle him gently. If the past months had proven anything, it was that resilience and compassion could triumph, even in the face of daunting odds. He switched off the light, darkness settling around them. Apollo exhaled, curling into a comfortable position. Daniel closed his eyes, letting sleep approach with an unusual sense of peace. Whatever the future held, he knew he was not alone. He had Apollo, a healing community, and the quiet assurance that true belonging came not from rank or assignment, but from helping each other find a place to stand. If you found yourself moved by Daniel's story, remember to like, subscribe, and let us know from which city you're following along. True growth sometimes unfolds in everyday acts of kindness, like a holiday dinner among strangers or a companion's steadfast loyalty. Sunlight streamed into Daniel's modest living room the next morning, illuminating a soft haze of dust motes drifting in the still air. He rolled over on the futon and realized, for once, he wasn't jolted awake by nightmares. Apollo, curled in his dog bed, cracked one eye open at the sound of Daniel stretching. Last night's holiday dinner still glowed in Daniel's thoughts. The warmth of communal acceptance and the flicker of Sergeant Rogers's unexpected truce lingered like a comforting aftertaste. He rose slowly, rubbed the ache in his leg, and made his way to the kitchen. Although the small space lacked modern frills, a battered stove and chipped countertops, it filled him with a homely satisfaction. This was, after all, the place he'd chosen and secured for himself and Apollo. While brewing coffee, Daniel caught sight of the folder Rogers had given him before leaving. He'd tucked it beside his sparse collection of books. The official forms for Apollo's permanent service dog designation were inside, waiting to be copied and filed. Part of Daniel wanted to race to the nearest printer this instant, but the local print shop wouldn't open for another hour, so he forced himself to savor the slow morning routine, sipping a steaming cup, walking Apollo around the small backyard, listening to the hum of the neighborhood. The backyard was quiet, the ground still damp from the previous evening's chill. While Apollo sniffed at a fence post, Daniel recalled the conversation with Rogers in the outreach center. He'd expected hostility or judgment, but instead found a man willing, almost eager, to tie up the loose ends. Perhaps people really could change, given the right push. Or maybe Rogers had realized that not every rule was meant to override basic human decency. Daniel resolved to print duplicates of every form later that day, ensuring he had thorough proof if any official questioned his right to keep Apollo again. He wouldn't leave a shred of doubt. Then he planned to stop by the outreach center and see how Ms. Porter was handling the aftermath of the big dinner. She'd confided in him once about feeling a post-event crash, the come-down after the energy and adrenaline of hosting so many people. Around mid-morning, Daniel leashed Apollo and headed toward a small strip of shops a few blocks away. The walk gave him time to mull over possibilities. He'd been juggling 2 part-time jobs for a while, scraping by financially but finding meaning in both the outreach work and the warehouse shifts. Maybe, he mused, it was time to consolidate. If he could convince Ms. Porter that he had the organizational skills and the passion to work full-time, perhaps they could secure grants to fund a salaried position for him. Or the warehouse might eventually promote him to a supervisory role. Either path could yield a more stable income. With Apollo's designation finalized, Daniel could take the dog anywhere, no questions asked. That freedom opened more options than he dared hope for even a month ago. He found the print shop, a narrow storefront squeezed between a convenience store and a shoe repair place. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped in, Apollo at his side. A bored-looking clerk glanced up. "Copies." "That's right," Daniel said, handing over a flash drive containing scanned versions of Rogers' documents. "Need some prints in triplicate, single-sided." "Sure," replied the clerk, eyeing Apollo with mild curiosity, but saying nothing. Moments later, the copier hummed, spitting out crisp pages. The clerk slid them into a plastic sleeve and handed them back. "Anything else?" Daniel shook his head, paid the modest fee, and stepped out into the bright day. He exhaled, glancing down at the forms. So simple a process, really, but such weight behind these sheets of paper. The law could be maddeningly complicated or disarmingly straightforward. At least now no one could dispute Apollo's role. The relief that swelled in Daniel's chest felt tangible. Leaving the strip mall, he wandered in the direction of the outreach center. Ms. Porter's building stood stoutly on a corner, murals still bright with images of unity and hope. Inside, he found a smaller crowd than usual. A few veterans lingered in the main hall, sipping coffee in paper cups. Ms. Porter was absent, but Troy waved him over from behind a folding table. "Morning," Daniel greeted, setting the folder on the table. "Where's Ms. Porter?" Troy shrugged. "She had errands, something about picking up leftover donations. She asked me to hold down the fort. I've been assigning tasks, handing out supplies, that kind of thing." He sounded pleased with his responsibilities. Around them, volunteers shuffled packages of toiletries and neatly folded clothing into labeled bins. Noticing Troy's quietly proud demeanor, Daniel smiled. "You seem more at ease here every day." Troy's cheeks colored. "This place helped me so much. Feels good to give back." He gestured to the stacks of boxes and files. "You want to look over the supply inventory? Ms. Porter said you're good at organizing data." "Sure thing." Daniel pulled a small laptop closer. He keyed in the supply logs, cross-referencing them with incoming shipments. While he worked, Apollo greeted a few newcomers, receiving gentle pats. The dog's calm presence continued to draw out smiles, especially from those who looked uncertain. Daniel noticed how even the tensest shoulders often relaxed once they made eye contact with Apollo. Hours passed in quiet productivity, with Troy occasionally seeking Daniel's opinion. Satisfied that the inventory logs were up to date, Daniel returned to the front desk. A phone rang, echoing in the hall. Troy scrambled to pick it up, answering in a slightly unsteady voice. After a moment, he covered the receiver and said, "Hey, Daniel, it's Ms. Porter. She wants to speak to you." Daniel took the phone. "Hey, Ms. Porter, everything okay?" "Fine, fine," came her breezy voice. "Daniel, I need a favor. We've got a meeting tonight with a potential sponsor, a small corporation that might donate funds for our programs. I want you to join me. Your story might help convince them." His heart fluttered. Public speaking still made him uneasy, but Ms. Porter's faith in him kindled a sense of purpose. "I'll do it," he agreed. "Just let me know where." "Thank you," she replied. "I'll text you the address. It's a local restaurant. Dress is casual, but do bring Apollo. They won't mind." Daniel hung up, noticing Troy grinning. "That's big. If we get corporate sponsorship, think of all the expansions we could do." Grateful for Troy's enthusiasm, Daniel nodded. Better facilities, more outreach, Ms. Porter's dream. And if it means I can keep working here more permanently, I'm all in. His mind flashed to the forms in his folder. Finally, all the pieces might fall into place. A secure role at the center, Apollo's designation official, and a stable living situation. He spent the remainder of the afternoon helping with mundane tasks. By late day, the crowd thinned, leaving just a handful of volunteers. Ms. Porter texted the meeting details, a nearby bistro known for hosting community gatherings. Daniel checked the clock on his phone. He had enough time to grab a quick change of clothes at home and return. He left Troy in charge, walked Apollo to the bus stop, and rode to his apartment. Once there, he rummaged through his limited wardrobe. He didn't own anything especially formal, but he found a clean collared shirt and black jeans. After a quick wash-up, he whistled for Apollo and set out again. The sense of stepping toward something pivotal pulsed in his veins. The bistro sat at the edge of a gentrified district, bright lights and a smattering of trendy establishments lining the block. Daniel paused outside the door, taking a moment to calm jitters. He reminded himself that Ms. Porter valued his realness, not a polished corporate persona. Apollo nudged him gently, as if saying, "Let's go." Inside, the warm glow of hanging Edison bulbs illuminated small tables and a polished bar. Ms. Porter, in a colorful scarf and determined expression, spotted him from a corner booth where two well-dressed individuals sat. "Daniel, there you are." She beckoned him over, voice cheerful, yet tinged with anticipation. "This is Julia Cohen and Aaron Reeves, representatives from Crestline Industries." Julia, a poised woman in a tailored blazer, extended her hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Daniel. Ms. Porter's told us all about your involvement at the center." Her gaze flicked to Apollo with an intrigued smile. "And of course, you must be Apollo." Aaron, bespectacled and slightly round, nodded agreeably. "We're dog people at Crestline," he explained, leaning forward to let Apollo sniff his hand. "We'd love to hear about how your service dog fits into your work with the veterans." Daniel eased into the booth next to Ms. Porter, carefully positioning Apollo so he didn't block the aisle. Heart-hammering, he remembered to breathe. "Well," he began, "Apollo and I served together overseas. When I came back, I struggled with PTSD. The outreach center helped me find purpose again, and Apollo helps our visitors feel safe." Julia's expression softened. "PTSD. That's not uncommon among veterans, yet you seem quite composed." Daniel glanced at Apollo, gathering strength from his presence. "I've learned coping strategies, and having Apollo at my side provides stability. Our center assists dozens of vets who face similar challenges. We aim to give them resources, a sense of belonging, and hope." Ms. Porter chimed in, explaining the center's ethos, bridging gaps between homelessness, mental health support, and reintegration. She described their success stories, from Troy to the older Marine who'd found friendship at the holiday dinner. With Crestline's backing, we could expand our therapy programs, create a proper employment training space, really transform lives. Julia nodded, her eyes brightening. And your goal is to reach more veterans in surrounding areas, correct? Perhaps open satellite centers? Yes, Ms. Porter confirmed. But we need consistent funding. Government grants can be fickle, and donations from local drives aren't always reliable. A partnership with Crestline could guarantee we continue this work long-term. The conversation flowed smoothly, Ms. Porter explaining logistics, Julia and Aaron asking pointed questions about budgets, impact data, and sustainability. While Ms. Porter handled the numbers, Daniel shared personal anecdotes, small triumphs where a canine presence helped break through a veteran's emotional barriers. He recounted stories of distributing care packages, how a simple gesture rebuilt someone's dignity. Each time he spoke of Apollo, it was with heartfelt reverence. By the time the waitress came by for drink orders, the atmosphere felt almost friendly. Aaron teased Julia about wanting to adopt every stray dog in the city, and Ms. Porter joked about her complete lack of cooking skill beyond boiling water. Daniel found himself laughing more freely than he'd expected. The corporate world could be intimidating, but Julia and Aaron seemed genuinely invested in doing good. At some point, Ms. Porter rested a hand on Daniel's arm. "Want to tell them about your big news?" she prompted, eyes shining. Daniel blinked, momentarily confused. Then it dawned on him. She meant the formal confirmation of Apollo's status. He fished into his folder and produced the fresh documents. Sergeant Rogers, an officer who once tried to reassign Apollo, just gave me these, Daniel explained. It finalizes Apollo's standing as my service dog, no more red tape, so I can continue at the center without fear of losing him. Julia's lips curved upward. That's fantastic, she said, scanning the header. Congratulations, such a relief, I'm sure. A wave of gratitude to Ms. Porter swelled in Daniel's chest. She was giving him a chance to show that the center's impact was personal, not just theoretical. He cleared his throat. This center, it saved me too as much as Apollo did. And we want to do the same for others. Any support from Crestline would amplify what we can accomplish. Even small changes, a new therapy room, more staff, could change lives. Aaron sipped his water, nodding pensively. We have a corporate foundation that specifically allocates funds to community-based initiatives. We look for programs demonstrating tangible outcomes, not just empty promises. Honestly, what you've described aligns well with our mission. Julia exchanged a look with Aaron. I think we can proceed with a formal proposal. Of course, our board has to vote, but given the track record Ms. Porter provided and Daniel's first-hand story, I believe they'll be on board. Ms. Porter nearly squealed with delight. That's all we need, a chance to show what we can do. The conversation wound down as the waitress returned, discreetly setting checks on the table. Julia insisted on covering the tab, calling it a small investment in a brighter future. They parted with handshakes and promises to finalize details within a week. After the Crestline reps departed, Ms. Porter sank back into the booth, eyes gleaming. Daniel, I can't thank you enough. He felt a surge of warmth. I barely did anything. They already liked you. She shook her head, pressing a hand to her chest. They liked hearing from someone who's living proof of our mission. That matters far more than you know. A hint of moisture glistened in her eyes, quickly blinked away. You've grown so much, Daniel. From that nervous soldier worried about losing his dog to this, talking with corporate reps, helping run the center, I'm proud. Daniel swallowed hard, touched. It's you who gave me a chance. This place, these people, and of course Apollo. Ms. Porter gave Apollo a fond pat on the head. "He's the best outreach volunteer we've ever had." They both laughed, releasing the tension of the evening's high stakes. After a few more minutes chatting about next steps, they left the bistro. Outside, the night air felt crisp, the sky clear. Ms. Porter headed to her car, waving goodbye. Daniel and Apollo lingered on the sidewalk a moment. "Ready to head home, bud?" Daniel asked softly. Apollo wagged his tail, stepping in close. Despite lingering city noise, a passing car, a distant siren, Daniel sensed calm. The swirl of possibility around Crestline's sponsorship opened new doors. Maybe the center could expand programs to help more vets or add staff so Ms. Porter could take a break sometimes. And with Apollo's legal status cemented, Daniel felt a peaceful confidence he hadn't known since the day he first stepped off the transport plane, wounded and unsure. They caught a late bus back to the apartment. The ride was uneventful, the interior mostly empty except for a young couple lost in conversation. Daniel settled into a seat, letting Apollo lie at his feet. As the city lights blurred past the windows, he reflected on how drastically his life had changed in just a few short months. Once he feared he had no future, only memories of desert nights and the suffocating weight of PTSD. But little by little, with Apollo's unwavering presence and the kindness of strangers who became friends, he was forging a new identity, a caretaker, a mentor, a bridge for others emerging from the fog of war. Stepping off at his stop, he led Apollo through the quiet streets to their apartment. The building stood calm and welcoming under a single flickering lamp. Inside, Daniel flicked on the overhead light, inhaling the faint smell of old paint that he'd come to find oddly comforting. He removed his jacket, then carefully placed the folder with Apollo's official paperwork in a small metal lockbox beneath his bed. Tomorrow, he would drop off copies to an appropriate government office, ensuring every last dot was in place. But tonight, he let relief sink into his bones. He whistled Apollo over, scratching behind the dog's ears in gentle gratitude. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" he murmured. "Making a life." Apollo's only reply was to press closer, a comforting warmth in the small apartment. Daniel flipped off the main light, settling onto the futon with a tired grin. Outside, a faint siren wailed, but it felt distant. The old soldier in him never fully relaxed, but for once he sensed no immediate threat. He had a path forward, a tight-knit community, and the loyal friend who'd seen him through deserts and courtrooms alike. If this story resonates with you, be sure to like, subscribe, and let us know your city in the comments. Each of us fights unseen battles, and sometimes an unexpected ally can help us find our way back to hope. Morning arrived with a crisp, bright sky, free of the heavy clouds that had hovered in previous days. Daniel woke to Apollo nosing at his hand, a gentle reminder it was time for their morning routine. He rose from the futon and felt only a slight twinge in his injured leg, a sign that his body was gradually healing. After a quick stretch, he checked the clock on his phone and noted there was plenty of time before his shift at the warehouse. The first task on his list, however, was filing those service dog documents. Now that Sergeant Rogers had given him the final forms, Daniel was eager to remove any last trace of uncertainty. He showered, dressed in a comfortable pair of jeans and a well-worn jacket, then filled Apollo's bowl. The dog ate briskly, tail wagging in anticipation of the day ahead. Daniel found himself humming softly, something he hadn't done in years. The future felt open, no longer weighted by fear of losing his faithful companion. With the official papers in a protective sleeve, Daniel locked up and set out through the neighborhood, Apollo alert at his side. His first destination was a small government office a few blocks from the bus stop. Official signage indicated it handled veterans' affairs, driver's licenses, and an array of bureaucratic odds and ends. Daniel braced himself for a wait. Stepping inside, he discovered a modest queue of people, many scanning forms or tapping phone screens. One or two gave a friendly nod at the sight of Apollo. Daniel took a number from the dispenser, found a seat, and exhaled. The waiting area smelled faintly of coffee and sanitizer, and each beep from the overhead monitor announced the next number in line. Apollo settled at Daniel's feet, panting quietly. As he waited, Daniel's mind drifted back to the dinner with Julia and Aaron from Crestline Industries. Ms. Porter had sounded thrilled by their interest, and Daniel was proud to have played a small role. The prospect of real sponsorship offered countless possibilities: more staff, more comprehensive programs, maybe even a therapy dog training course. He pictured an expanded facility where men and women fresh from deployment could find immediate support and camaraderie. If the board approved, he imagined traveling to help establish new outreach posts in other cities. The thought both excited and unnerved him. Could he handle stepping outside his fragile comfort zone? A soft beep echoed overhead. "Now serving number 32, droned a voice from the speaker. Daniel checked his slip. 35. Almost his turn. He gave Apollo a reassuring pat. The dog's presence steadied Daniel in places like these, where the forced hush and sterile lighting could trigger old anxieties. At last, the monitor flashed 35. Daniel stood, crossing to a gray-haired clerk behind a tall counter. "Good morning," the clerk greeted politely. "What can we help you with today?" Daniel laid out the folder. "I'm here to finalize documents relating to my service dog, Apollo. I have a letter from an Army official and the updated classification forms." The clerk slipped on a pair of reading glasses, quickly scanning the paperwork. "You'll need to fill out the 10 Alpha application as well, verifying your personal information and the dog's microchip data." He pushed a form across the counter. "We can attach Rogers's letter and your previous court ruling to that file. Then we'll register Apollo in the official service dog database, making your status indisputable." Daniel nodded, taking the pen offered and scribbling his details carefully. Apollo's microchip number sat memorized in Daniel's head, a relic of countless forms they had endured together. The clerk typed Daniel's responses into a computer, occasionally asking for clarifications. Within 15 minutes, it was done. The clerk printed a confirmation receipt. "Keep this for your records," he said, sliding the paper through the gap. "And thank you for your service, Sergeant Brooks." Daniel tucked the receipt into his wallet. "Thanks for your help," he replied, voice tinged with relief. As he turned to leave, a subtle warmth spread in his chest. This final step might seem bureaucratic to others, but for him it sealed a victory no battlefield honor could rival. Outside, the sun had risen higher, bathing the street in pale gold. Daniel paused, looking up at the open sky with a feeling of gratitude. Apollo pressed close to his leg, tail swishing in a companionable rhythm. Deciding to mark the occasion, Daniel stopped by a corner cafe for a quick coffee. He found an outdoor seat, tying Apollo's leash to a sturdy chair leg. The barista handed him a latte, and Daniel took a moment to savor the swirl of foam, letting the day's tension seep away. His phone buzzed with a text from Ms. Porter. "Hope the doc filing went well. Any chance you can pop by the center before your shift? Need help with some follow-up from the dinner." Daniel quickly typed back a confirmation. Draining the last of the latte, he gathered Apollo and continued toward the bus stop. The outreach center was quieter than usual, staff recovering from the holiday dinner's intensity. A few volunteers sorted leftover tablecloths and containers, but the main hall sat empty. Daniel spotted Ms. Porter in her small office, rummaging through a stack of mail. She motioned for him to enter. "There you are," she said, offering a weary smile. "I've got news. Crestline's board wants a formal presentation next week. Julia emailed me this morning. They're bringing in a few extra directors to assess potential philanthropic investments." Daniel perched on a battered chair, Apollo flopping at his feet. "So we'll need to prepare a slideshow or something?" Ms. Porter nodded, tension showing in the tightness around her eyes. They want data on outcomes, personal testimonies, budget breakdowns, the works. With your warehouse job, I hate to impose, but I could really use your help pulling everything together. He gave an emphatic nod. Of course. I'll schedule my shifts so I can devote time here. We can compile stats on how many veterans we've served, highlight success stories, maybe even bring Troy or someone else to speak. That's a great idea. She exhaled, leaning back in her chair. I just want to make a strong impression. If we land significant funding, we could hire more staff, add specialized therapy programs, maybe even open a second location one day. It's almost overwhelming. Daniel reached out and gently touched her wrist. We've got this. You've led us this far. Ms. Porter gave him a grateful look. We'll do it together. Then her eyes flickered to Apollo, who watched her with ears cocked. And you'll be part of the presentation too, buddy. You're living proof of what animals can do for mental health. They spent the next hour brainstorming. Ms. Porter asked Daniel to gather all the data from their sign-in logs, documenting how many people had consistently used the center's services. She assigned him the task of reaching out to a few individuals who might be comfortable sharing personal stories on short video clips. Meanwhile, Ms. Porter would handle the financial aspects, cost per program, monthly overhead, potential expansion projections. They planned a plan of action, scribbling notes on sticky papers that soon covered Ms. Porter's bulletin board. Eventually, Daniel realized he needed to hurry if he was to reach the warehouse on time. He promised to return in the evening to continue. Ms. Porter gave him a thumbs up, eyes glinting with renewed determination. Apollo followed Daniel out the door, tail still wagging from the excitement. They caught the next bus, and Daniel spent the ride mentally rehearsing how he might approach co-workers with the idea of short interviews about why the center mattered. Even if they weren't direct beneficiaries, some warehouse employees had friends or family in the service and might relate. Arriving at the warehouse, he found Earl near the loading dock, scanning a new shipment manifest. Earl greeted him with a brisk nod. Glad you're here, Daniel. We've got another wave of inventory to log. The cops closed their investigation now that Jake's in custody, so at least that's off our shoulders. Daniel's stomach twisted at the mention of Jake. He still felt uneasy about how quickly the blame settled on that quiet co-worker, but with the evidence apparently strong, Daniel tried to move forward. All right, he said simply, moving to the station with the scanning gun. Let's see what's on the docket. He worked diligently, letting the routine of scanning boxes distract him from lingering questions about Jake. The beep of the scanner created a hypnotic rhythm. Apollo rested calmly behind him, out of the way of forklift traffic. Occasionally, a co-worker would pass and greet them, but the mood remained subdued, still scarred by the theft's fallout. Daniel pushed away the tension, focusing on each task. During his break, he checked messages on his phone. Troy had texted, enthusiastic about the chance to film a short testimonial for the Crestline presentation. Another volunteer from the center also agreed to share a personal success story. Buoyed by the positive replies, Daniel typed quick thanks in return. As the day progressed, thoughts of the upcoming presentation fueled his motivation. He pictured new training rooms, expanded counseling sessions, perhaps a stable job position for him. In the past, such daydreaming might have felt out of reach, but now it seemed plausible. One step at a time. When the shift ended, Daniel said his farewells to Earl and made his way back to the outreach center. This time, Apollo guided him confidently, as if aware they had important work waiting. Ms. Porter had rearranged her office, stacking folders along one wall and reserving a table for their planning. Troy was there too, scrolling through a set of photos from various events. These will be perfect for the slideshow, he said, glancing up as Daniel entered. How was work? Busy, Daniel replied, loosening his jacket. No drama, thankfully. He cracked a small grin at Ms. Porter before joining Troy. So, what do we have so far? Troy showed him the photos, snapshots of veterans sharing laughter at the holiday dinner, a group activity day in the main hall, a moment captured with Ms. Porter hugging an elderly Marine who'd found stable housing through the center's referral. Each image radiated hope. Daniel felt a lump form in his throat at the reminder of how far they'd come. Many of those featured had been at rock bottom. Together, they spent 2 hours drafting an outline for the presentation. Ms. Porter's bullet points covered the center's mission, proven track record, proposed expansions, and budget details. Interspersed between data slides, Daniel and Troy placed personal testimonies and photos. The final piece would feature a short cameo from Apollo, bridging Daniel's own story with the broader mission of therapeutic companionship. Daniel typed with focused intensity, shaping the narrative that would soon be shown to Crestline's board. Eventually, Ms. Porter glanced at the clock. It's late. I need rest or I'll be useless tomorrow. Let's reconvene in 2 days to finalize everything, all right? Both men agreed. Troy gathered his belongings while Daniel shut down the computer. Outside, the air had grown cold. They paused under a flickering street lamp, saying their goodnights. Troy hopped on a bus, while Ms. Porter offered Daniel a ride, but he declined politely. The bus ride might let him decompress. She smiled understandingly, giving Apollo one last pat before driving off. Daniel felt a swirl of contentment as he and Apollo waited for their bus. Yes, his day had been long and tomorrow promised more busy hours, but the tasks before him, finishing that presentation, standing confidently in front of corporate decision-makers, didn't intimidate him the way public scrutiny once had. The transformation in his mindset felt surreal. He attributed it to the unwavering support of Ms. Porter, the daily camaraderie with Troy, and especially the presence of Apollo, whose quiet reassurance never wavered. Back home, Daniel microwaved a late snack, a leftover burrito from the Outreach Center's supply of donated food, and gave Apollo his evening meal. He flicked on the small TV, but his mind wandered from the news anchor's voice. Instead, he pictured Ms. Porter's face when they secured the sponsorship, the expansions that could become a reality, and the new wave of veterans who'd find hope. Anxiety might still bubble up at times, but in its place rose a sense of genuine purpose. Lying on the futon, he gazed around the dimly lit apartment. The battered trunk in the corner whispered of old battles, but the present felt distinctly new. He reminded himself that healing was not a straight path. He might stumble again, especially if nightmares returned or if triggers blindsided him. Yet the difference now was that he had an anchor in Apollo, a cause worth fighting for in the Outreach Center, and the knowledge that he was capable of forging a better life. The next few days would be busy, balancing shifts at the warehouse, finalizing the big pitch for Crestline, and continuing to help Ms. Porter keep the center afloat. Still, each step felt like progress. No longer did he roam aimlessly, certain only of how out of place he was. Instead, Daniel held on to a quiet but firm conviction that he belonged precisely where he chose to be. He closed his eyes, exhaling softly. Apollo padded over, resting his head on the side of the futon as if to say goodnight. Daniel reached down, running his fingers through the dog's fur. The hush of the apartment enveloped them, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt the future pull him forward, not down. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this story speaks to you, and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Every shared moment of kindness can be a turning point in someone's life, just as it's been in Daniel's. Daniel woke to the soft chime of his alarm rather than the sear of nightmares, a small yet significant victory. He rose from the futon and caught sight of Apollo already on alert, tail thumping against the rug as if to say, "Finally, You're up." Outside, the sky carried a pale dawn that promised a mild day. Despite the early hour, Daniel felt a steady pulse of excitement. The presentation at Crestline was scheduled for the following afternoon. That meant today was his last chance to refine the slides, gather final testimonies, and calm the butterflies in his stomach. After getting dressed and brewing coffee, Daniel clipped Apollo's leash and stepped out for a brisk walk around the block. The neighborhood was quiet at this hour. Few cars, fewer pedestrians. A retired man 2 doors down waved from his front porch. A tabby cat skittered under a fence upon spotting Apollo's silhouette. Daniel inhaled the crisp air, thoughts drifting to the coming day. If all went well with Crestline, the Outreach Center's next chapter would soon unfold. Back at the apartment, he fed Apollo and checked his phone. Ms. Porter had sent a text. "Meeting me at the center by 9. We'll finalize slides and do a practice run." Daniel replied with a thumbs up, downed his coffee, and gathered his laptop. In a small mirror by the door, he caught a glimpse of himself, tired eyes, but a determined set to his jaw. He gave Apollo a nod. "All right, let's go make a difference." They hopped a bus that rattled toward the Outreach Center. In the brightening light, Daniel noticed the city stirring, shops opening, delivery trucks rumbling past. The environment felt oddly peaceful. He thought back to the tension that once gripped him on public transit, how easily a sudden noise could trigger panic. Though not entirely gone, that tension had softened, thanks to Apollo's grounding presence and Daniel's newly shaped sense of belonging. Ms. Porter greeted them at the center's entrance, juggling a phone and clipboard. "Morning," she said briskly. "I've got calls lined up with potential references. Can you boot up our ancient desktop in my office and load the final PowerPoint?" Daniel followed her inside, weaving around volunteers restocking shelves. The main hall was nearly empty, a stark contrast to the bustling events of prior weeks. But a few veterans lingered, sipping coffee in plastic chairs. Daniel nodded to them, then slipped into Ms. Porter's cramped office. The old computer took a while to warm up, humming like it might be struggling to breathe. Finally, the screen flickered on. He found the file with their slides, a tidy sequence detailing the Outreach Center's mission, stats, personal stories, budget. Photos of real people, including Troy, brightened the slides, and an insert showed Ms. Porter hugging Apollo at one of the holiday gatherings. Daniel smiled to himself. Each image told a story of resilience, a testament to what compassion could achieve. He tested the slideshow, clicking through with a critical eye. Apart from a few minor typos, it looked solid. By mid-morning, Ms. Porter ducked in, cheeks flushed with a mix of nerves and excitement. "How's it looking?" she asked, leaning over Daniel's shoulder. "Really good," he said. "I adjusted the bullet points on the expansion plan. Figured a simpler layout might be clearer." She nodded. "Smart. Also, I just confirmed Troy's willing to join us tomorrow, in case Crestline wants an in-person testimonial. They're meeting us at their downtown office at 4. Suit and tie optional, but we should look presentable." Daniel raised a brow. "I don't really have a suit. I have a decent blazer. Does that suffice?" "It'll do. And bring Apollo, of course." She exhaled. "I'm both excited and terrified, Daniel. We've never pitched something this big." He rested a hand gently on her arm. "We'll show them who we are. You've done amazing work. They'll see that." Her eyes softened. She checked her watch. "Okay. I have to run to a local church. They're donating some surplus supplies. Will you and Apollo oversee things for a bit?" "Sure," he replied. "We'll be here." She hurried off, leaving Daniel to file paperwork and field any new visitors. The center remained relatively calm. Troy arrived around noon, offering help in reorganizing a back closet. While rummaging through boxes of donated clothes, Troy joked about how he never pictured himself doing inventory. Daniel grinned, remembering his own scanning tasks at the warehouse. Sometimes, Daniel said, the quiet tasks are the glue that holds everything together. They grabbed lunch from a nearby sandwich shop, taking a break in the courtyard behind the center. A few wooden benches sat under a spindly tree, the winter sun casting weak but welcome warmth. Apollo flopped down at Daniel's feet, eyeing Troy's sandwich but refraining from begging. Troy stretched out his legs, a relaxed grin on his face. "I used to dread waking up," Troy said, voice low. "No reason to get out of bed. Now, though, the center's given me purpose. Next week I start training at a repair shop. The owner agreed to flexible hours so I can still volunteer here." Daniel felt a surge of pride for Troy, recalling their early encounters when Troy was nearly homeless and deeply withdrawn. "That's incredible," Daniel said. "I'm happy for you." Troy nodded. "And I'm happy for you. You've come a long way from that worried guy at the bus stop, remember?" He scratched Apollo behind the ears. "This one's a guardian angel in dog form." Daniel smiled at Apollo. "Yeah, he is." He hesitated a moment, then added, "Actually, I finally filed the last batch of documents to make our partnership fully official. No more loopholes." "Good," Troy said, satisfied. "You two belong together." After lunch, they returned inside. Ms. Porter wasn't back yet, so Daniel used the lull to finalize a few details on a shared Google spreadsheet, a list of local veterans willing to speak at events, a catalog of donated items that still needed distribution, and a section for future expansions. With each keystroke, he envisioned the center bustling with even more activity, more staff, more hope. The idea invigorated him. By mid-afternoon, Ms. Porter finally returned, looking triumphant. "We got a nice haul of winter coats plus some canned goods," she announced. Then she motioned Daniel into her office. "I need to run through the presentation with you. We should do a mock rehearsal, see how the flow goes." So they did. Daniel clicked through each slide, letting Ms. Porter practice her introduction. She laid out the statistics with admirable clarity, then cued Daniel to share his personal angle. He swallowed hard, but spoke of his struggle with PTSD, Apollo's role in his recovery, and how the outreach center gave him renewed purpose. Her voice then lifted with a final appeal. "We stand for second chances, unity, and building each other up." Daniel nodded, ending on a heartfelt note about how one rescued soldier and a rescued dog could spark a chain reaction of hope for countless others. When they finished, Ms. Porter's hands trembled with adrenaline. "I think we've got something special, Daniel. It's raw and real." "Crestline wants real," he agreed. "We're not promising the moon. We're showing them what we've already done." She smiled, shoulders relaxing. "Exactly." Before heading out, Daniel noticed an older man in the lobby, gently patting Apollo's head. The man introduced himself as Albert, a Korean War veteran who'd recently visited the center. He thanked Daniel for his service, and Daniel in turn thanked Albert for his, grateful for the quiet bond shared among those who served in different eras. Moments like that reminded him of the broader legacy they all carried. Daniel left the center around 5, waving goodbye to Ms. Porter and Troy. The evening sky glowed in orange and purple, the sun sinking behind distant buildings. On the bus ride home, he thought about the steps leading him here, from fighting to keep Apollo in court, to facing uncertainties at the warehouse, to forging a new identity in the outreach center's mission. Tomorrow's presentation stood as another milestone. He felt a mixture of excitement and nerves, but Apollo's steady breathing eased the jitters. At home, he fed Apollo and prepared a simple dinner for himself. While the microwave hummed, he rummaged through his small closet, laying out his black jeans and the navy blue blazer. The clothes weren't new, but at least they were clean and neat. He checked the blazer pockets to ensure no old receipts or gum wrappers lurked inside. Satisfied, he draped them over a chair. His mind drifted to the warehouse. Earl had given him the day off tomorrow upon hearing about the Crestline meeting. "Go get him," Earl had said. That simple encouragement meant more to Daniel than he could express. The wariness that once defined his interactions with civilians was morphing into trust. Maybe, he thought, that was the real victory, discovering that not everyone on the outside was indifferent or hostile. After dinner, he settled on the futon with Apollo lying beside him, scrolling through his phone for news updates. A headline about veteran reintegration caught his eye. It touched on the challenges of PTSD, joblessness, and mental health. Daniel felt a familiar pang, but this time it was tempered by the knowledge that he was actively part of the solution. The outreach center might be just one small beacon, but for the people it served, it was a lifeline. He closed the news app, feeling a small surge of resolve. Tomorrow he'd stand before Crestline representatives and speak his truth. No grand theatrics, just honesty about what the center could do with the right support. If they succeeded, the city's veteran community could see a ripple of positive change. Even if it was modest at first, every person touched by the outreach center added to a growing wave of hope. Daniel thought of Troy, Ms. Porter, the older Marine at the holiday dinner, even Sergeant Rogers, who had come around in the end. Each had contributed a piece to this improbable mosaic of redemption and growth. Sleep found him earlier than usual. He dreamed not of gunfire and desert darkness, but of a bright auditorium where smiling faces nodded in agreement at Ms. Porter's words. In the dream, Apollo wore a tiny tie around his neck and the audience chuckled affectionately. Daniel woke with a half-smile, relieved that even his subconscious offered support. Morning light streamed in. The day had arrived. He showered, ate a quick breakfast, and dressed in his chosen outfit. Apollo's harness got a thorough wipe down, ensuring it looked its best. Then, Daniel bussed to the center, where Ms. Porter awaited, tapping her foot in barely contained excitement. Together, they double-checked the slideshow, finalizing any last details. Troy arrived in a pressed shirt, anxious but eager. They piled into Ms. Porter's car for the drive downtown, the roads busy with mid-afternoon traffic. Crestline's corporate offices occupied a sleek glass tower. At the entrance, a security guard welcomed them politely. Daniel kept his posture confident, reminding himself that he belonged here. Apollo walked calmly by his side, drawing admiring glances from passing employees. They rode an elevator to the 25th floor, stepping into a reception area tastefully furnished with modern art and plants. Julia Cohen emerged, her professional demeanor laced with genuine warmth. "Ms. Porter, Daniel, Troy, and Apollo," she greeted, extending handshakes all around. "We're excited to hear your presentation. Let's head to the conference room." They filed into a spacious room lined with large windows offering a panoramic city view. A polished table surrounded by well-dressed individuals waited. Julia introduced them, directors of various departments, from human resources to community outreach. Aaron Reeves sat near the far end, giving Daniel and Ms. Porter an encouraging nod. Ms. Porter launched into her introduction, voice steady. She described the outreach center's genesis, the need it filled, and the personal drive that kept it running despite financial hurdles. Each slide illuminated the center's work, photos, anecdotes, statistics. Then she gestured for Daniel to step forward. Heart pounding, he inhaled and spoke of his personal journey, from the day he nearly lost Apollo in court to finding renewed purpose at the center. He shared how offering support to others mirrored the support he'd once desperately needed. Apollo sat at his side, calm as ever, a living testament to transformation. When Daniel finished, Troy took over briefly. Voice trembling at first, he recounted his own path, homelessness, despair, and how Ms. Porter's unconditional acceptance allowed him to reclaim his life. By the time he finished, One of Crestline's directors dabbed at her eye with a tissue, clearly moved. Ms. Porter concluded, outlining precisely how a partnership with Crestline would enable the outreach center to expand. She requested a sum that seemed modest compared to typical corporate budgets, but that would mean the world to their small operation. A hush filled the room. Julia thanked them for the thorough presentation and opened the floor for questions. A few directors inquired about scalability, volunteer management, and how the center tracked outcomes. Ms. Porter and Daniel answered smoothly. Troy added thoughtful remarks about how, even with limited resources, the center had maintained a consistent success rate in helping veterans secure housing or job leads. The Q&A felt less like an interrogation and more like a genuine dialogue about solutions. After a final exchange, the board members asked for a moment to deliberate. Ms. Porter, Daniel, Troy, and Apollo stepped into the hallway, nerves buzzing. Ms. Porter tapped her foot, whispering, "That went well, right?" Troy grinned sheepishly and Daniel nodded. Apollo sensed the tension, pressing gently against Daniel's leg. A staffer appeared with bottled water, offering a polite smile. Seconds trickled, then minutes. Finally, the door reopened. Julia beckoned them in. Faces around the table looked positive. Aaron stood, clearing his throat. "We're pleased to inform you that Crestline is ready to offer a foundational grant to the Outreach Center, contingent on certain reporting milestones. This initial grant is for 2 years, with the possibility of renewal." Ms. Porter's eyes brimmed with tears. She clasped her hands to her mouth, struggling for composure. Troy let out a soft gasp. Daniel's heart soared, relief mingling with gratitude. Aaron continued, "We believe in your mission, and we see that your methods are effective. Thank you for sharing your stories, and we hope this partnership leads to bigger and brighter things for everyone involved." The wave of excitement was near tangible. Ms. Porter thanked them profusely, and Troy managed a shaky, "Thank you so much." Daniel exhaled, chest tight with emotion. He wasn't sure whether to speak, but managed. "This is a turning point for a lot of good people." The directors offered warm smiles, some approaching to shake hands. Julia even crouched slightly to pat Apollo's head. "He's a hero," she remarked quietly. Daniel nodded, voice caught in his throat. They left the boardroom on a cloud of joy. Ms. Porter hugged Daniel and Troy in the elevator, tears finally breaking free. Troy laughed in disbelief, hugging her back. Daniel's own eyes misted over. Apollo pressed his nose to Daniel's palm, sharing in the moment as only he could, steadfast, silently celebrating. Down in the lobby, they paused near a set of sleek benches, letting the shock subside. "I can't believe it," Ms. Porter said, wiping her cheeks. "All these years, we might finally have the resources to give the center what it needs." Troy nodded fervently. "We can help so many more people." Daniel ran a hand over Apollo's collar. "And you, Ms. Porter, can breathe. No more scraping by, losing sleep about bills." She laughed shakily. "True enough, but this also means more work. Overseeing expansions, hiring staff. Are we up for it?" "Absolutely," Daniel replied, a confident warmth rising within him. "One step at a time, right?" They stepped out into the crisp afternoon sun. It glowed brighter than ever, or so it seemed. Daniel and Apollo bid farewell to Ms. Porter and Troy, each heading their separate ways with smiles that wouldn't fade. Riding the bus back, Daniel recalled the countless times he'd felt hopeless, trapped by memories of war, defined by an uncertain civilian life. Now he saw open paths everywhere. He imagined the newly funded center, bustling with innovative programs, therapy sessions, job training, and specialized groups for military families. Maybe Ms. Porter would hire him full-time, letting him combine his warehouse know-how with a leadership role. And throughout it all, Apollo would remain the heart of his journey. Entering his apartment that evening, Daniel couldn't stop smiling. It felt surreal. He set down his keys, ruffled Apollo's ears, and stared at the battered trunk in the corner. Without hesitation, he walked over, lifted the lid, and gently rummaged past old uniforms and faded letters. He pulled out a single photo, himself as a fresh-faced recruit long before the nightmares. Instead of pain, he felt gratitude that life had guided him here to second chances and new beginnings. If you've been inspired by Daniel's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your city below. Sometimes, the difference between despair and hope is just one kind gesture, or the unwavering loyalty of a friend who never leaves your side. A week after Crestline's approval, the Outreach Center glowed with renewed energy. Their bustling main hall never seemed to empty, and the newly awarded grant funds began trickling in, allowing Ms. Porter to hire extra help. Although the full expansion would take time, each small improvement, an additional staffer, better computers, fresh paint in the counseling room, breathed fresh life into the place. Volunteers who'd once felt the strain of limited resources seemed to carry themselves with new confidence. Daniel witnessed it all with a joy that was both humbling and exhilarating. He came in each morning at 8, greeted by the gentle hum of activity. The coffee station was stocked now, thanks to a local business donation, so he'd pour himself a hot cup and catch up with Troy on the day's to-do list. Marcus sometimes dropped by to help, joking that Daniel had upgraded from living on his couch to running half the center. Daniel, for his part, felt like his role was evolving daily. Ms. Porter had him overseeing organizational tasks, scheduling therapy sessions, maintaining volunteer rosters, even running short orientation talks for new recruits. And all with Apollo quietly padding alongside, his mere presence coaxing smiles and easing tense shoulders. One brisk afternoon, Ms. Porter called a staff meeting to discuss how best to use the initial portion of Crestline's grant. They gathered in the office, Daniel, Troy, a new hire named Carmen, who specialized in mental health outreach, and 2 part-time counselors the center had recently brought on. Ms. Porter, perched on the edge of her chair, explained that she'd like to expand the therapy dog idea into a formal program. "We've seen how Apollo breaks down barriers," she said, nodding at Daniel's faithful companion. "Imagine a dedicated training space where other rescued dogs learn to be service or emotional support animals for veterans." Eyes lit up around the small circle. Daniel felt a thrill at the notion. "That would be incredible," he murmured. "But we need a safe area, a yard, plus trainers." "We could partner with local shelters," Carmen suggested. "They always have dogs in need of adoption, some perfectly suited for therapy roles. If we had the right trainers, we could help those animals find new purpose alongside the veterans who come here." The idea captured everyone's enthusiasm. Ms. Porter tapped her pen on a notepad. "Let's sketch out an initial plan. We'll propose a pilot program to Crestline. It might take a few months to set up, but if successful, it'd be a game changer." She looked at Daniel. "You've got first-hand experience with a service dog. Your input will be crucial." He felt a rush of gratitude. Every step of his journey, from the courthouse to that moment, guided him toward this possibility, using his story to help countless others forge similar bonds. He nodded, heart pounding. "Count me in." Over the following days, a flurry of brainstorming sessions took place. They identified local trainers Ms. Porter knew through contacts. They drew up budgets for dog food, vet bills, and any necessary facilities. Troy even found a plot of green space behind the building that could be fenced off if they secured permission from the city. On top of that, Daniel juggled his part-time warehouse job, but Earl proved supportive, letting him rearrange shifts to accommodate the center's growing needs. Between these expansions, everyday life continued. Veterans arrived seeking help, homeless individuals found warmth, and families came for counseling. Each day presented small challenges: an argument in the lobby, a volunteer calling out sick, a desperate phone call from someone on the brink. But the center's new sense of hope gave them the resilience to tackle issues head-on. Late one evening, Daniel stayed behind to close up. The others had gone, leaving him to lock doors and switch off lights. He roamed the quiet halls, Apollo at his side. His footsteps echoed, and for a moment memory lapped at him, distant images of patrolling empty corridors overseas. Except here, the quiet felt safe. He thought about how this building, once a mere drop-in spot, now stood as a beacon for so many. Senses alert, he paused by the door of a small counseling room. The overhead light was off, but the hall lamp cast a mild glow inside. Hanging on the wall was a photograph of the holiday dinner, the one Miss Porter had taken from her phone. Daniel and Apollo surrounded by smiling veterans. He moved closer, heart tugging at the recognition of how far they'd come. A single tear prickled, not sadness, more a profound sense of being part of something bigger. Back at his apartment, Daniel settled onto the futon, exhaustion mingling with satisfaction. He glanced at Apollo, who plopped down with a huff as though saying, "Today was busy." Daniel nodded in agreement. Nearly every day felt busy now, a far cry from the restless wandering of months past. He'd grown into a kind of mentor figure at the center, and though he still struggled with occasional flashbacks, the anchor of a shared mission helped him cope. He also had an interview scheduled with Ms. Porter the following week, an official talk about transitioning into a full-time staff position at the Outreach Center. Crestline's grant meant they could afford another paid role, and Ms. Porter insisted she wanted Daniel for it. The prospect excited him, despite lingering anxieties about his skill set. He wasn't a trained social worker, but he had lived experience, sincerity, and an evident knack for connecting with others. Maybe that was enough. In the midst of these developments, a letter arrived one afternoon from an unexpected source. Sergeant Rogers. Postmarked from a different city, its envelope bore the Army's emblem. Daniel opened it cautiously in Ms. Porter's office, discovering a short, handwritten note. Rogers wrote that he'd officially submitted all the forms related to Apollo's case, confirming that no pending claims remained. He added a personal line, "Keep doing what you're doing. Soldiers like you prove that discipline and compassion can coexist." Daniel reread those words, touched by the shift in Rogers's tone from adversary to reluctant ally. He shared the letter with Ms. Porter, who broke into a wide smile. "That's one less worry," she said. "You can move forward without looking over your shoulder." A few days later, Daniel's phone buzzed with a call from a number he didn't recognize. Hesitantly, he answered. "Hello? Daniel? It's Jake," came a subdued voice. Surprise flared. Jake, the co-worker at the warehouse who'd been arrested for theft. Daniel's mind flashed to the day the police led him away in handcuffs. "Jake, where are you calling from?" Jake cleared his throat. "I'm out on bail. My lawyer's trying to prove I was set up. I know this might be awkward, but I wondered if you could help me. You're the only one at work I felt might see it wasn't me." Daniel inhaled, emotions churning. Part of him wanted to distance himself from the entire ordeal, but another part remembered how unsettled he'd felt about Jake's arrest. "If you're innocent, I'd want the truth to come out," Daniel said carefully. "What are you asking me to do?" Jake sounded desperate. "Could you just tell the lawyer anything you noticed leading up to the break-in, like how I acted, maybe how I was texting on my phone for personal reasons, not to coordinate any theft? If I had wanted to steal, I wouldn't hang around in plain sight. I know it's a big favor." Daniel glanced at Apollo, who watched him closely, ears slightly forward. The dog's calm gaze reminded him that he'd learned compassion from this very bond. "I'll speak honestly," Daniel agreed. "I can't fabricate anything, but I'll confirm that I only ever saw you looking worried, not sneaky. If the police found stolen goods in your trunk, though, that's tough to dispute." Jake exhaled a shaky breath. Someone planted them. I swear. I'll send you my lawyer's number. Thanks, man. Daniel ended the call, unsettled. The warehouse fiasco remained a dark cloud in his otherwise brightening life. Though the outreach center soared on the wings of a new grant, another corner of Daniel's reality contained suspicion and potential injustice. He promised himself he'd do what he could, but also recognized the limits of his involvement. Over the next few days, Daniel balanced that concern with the center's demands. He agreed to meet Jake's lawyer, providing a written statement that Daniel had never witnessed suspicious behavior on Jake's part beyond the phone usage. He also mentioned his intuition that Jake seemed anxious rather than devious. Whether the statement would help, Daniel wasn't sure, but at least he honored the truth. Meanwhile, Ms. Porter finalized a job offer for Daniel, a full-time position with the center as an operations coordinator. He'd essentially coordinate volunteers, manage donations, maintain schedules, and aid in special projects, exactly the tasks he'd been doing, but with a stable salary and official title. The day she presented him with the paperwork, Daniel felt tears threaten. He glanced at Apollo, who tilted his head as if to say, "Well, this is what you wanted, right?" "Are you sure about me?" he asked Ms. Porter, voice tight with emotion. "I'm not a certified counselor or anything." "You're more than enough," she replied firmly. "Your presence, your empathy, you've made more progress with some of our vets than I've seen any professional accomplish. You'll continue learning, and we'll have counselors for clinical issues, but you, Daniel, are the heartbeat of this place, along with Apollo. We need you." He signed the contract on the spot. By the end of the week, he gave Earl his notice at the warehouse, though he offered to stay on part-time if necessary. Earl clapped him on the shoulder, congratulating him. "Proud of you," Earl said. "We'll miss you, but you're clearly meant for bigger things." Daniel felt a twinge of affection for the scruffy warehouse boss, remembering how Earl had been the first to welcome Apollo without question. The following Monday marked Daniel's first official day as operations coordinator. Arriving early, he found Ms. Porter waiting with a small sheet cake and a celebratory balloon tied to a chair. Troy, Carmen, and a handful of volunteers cheered when Daniel stepped inside with Apollo. Someone had written "Congrats, Daniel and Apollo" on the cake in uneven icing. Daniel laughed, touched by the gesture. Not so long ago, he was a lonely veteran with no direction. Now, people were celebrating his future. He settled at the desk Ms. Porter designated as his, a simple wooden surface in a corner of the main office. It held an old desktop, neatly stacked forms, and a file drawer labeled "Coordinator." Daniel flexed his fingers, recalling the days he'd dreaded bureaucratic tasks. Now, sorting forms for the center felt like part of a meaningful mission. Apollo curled up beside the desk, settling into a brand new dog bed embroidered with the center's logo, a gift from Troy. In the ensuing days, Daniel thrived. He coordinated donation pickups, arranged volunteer schedules, and even began drafting a structured training outline for the new therapy dog pilot program. Carmen organized meet and greets with local shelters, eager to partner. Ms. Porter promised to approach Crestline for supplemental funds once they hammered out details. And each evening Daniel went home to his humble apartment, a comforting sense of purpose trailing him. Troy continued volunteering, radiating steady confidence. He had secured a stable job at the repair shop, so he dropped by the center on weekends, helping greet visitors. The old group therapy sessions ran more smoothly, courtesy of new staff and better resources. Word spread among veterans that the center was expanding, offering more job training opportunities, more counseling hours, and warm smiles without judgment. Sometimes, late at night, Daniel gazed at the battered trunk in his apartment and remembered the desert nights, the tensions, and the day Apollo led him out of harm's way. He'd recall the courthouse steps where he'd nearly broken, sure that the system would tear his best friend away. He'd think of how Ms. Porter's unwavering faith had led him to a new calling, and how people like Troy or even Rogers played unexpected parts in that story. In those quiet reflections, he recognized that his journey had not been a straight line, but rather a winding path filled with trials that shaped his resilience. On one such evening, he decided it was time to open that trunk again, not just to glance inside, but to truly sort through its contents. He sat on the floor, Apollo by his side, carefully lifting items out. Old photographs of boot camp, letters from his mother, his father's tattered dog tags, relics of a complicated family history. A pang hit him remembering the father who had never quite understood why Daniel enlisted. Now they barely spoke. Still, Daniel kept those dog tags as a reminder that everyone has their battles. He found a small leather-bound journal, half filled with entries he'd scrawled during deployment. Pages of raw emotion, fear, anger, hope. Skimming through them, he felt an ache, but also a sense of release, as if bridging the gap between past and present. Apollo rested his chin on Daniel's knee, seeming to sense the significance. At the bottom of the trunk lay a folded American flag, the one presented to him after a fellow soldier's funeral. He pulled it out, fingertips sliding along the fabric. An unexpected sob caught in his throat. The soldier had been a friend, someone who once teased Daniel about missing home-cooked meals. He hadn't made it home, and that guilt lingered in Daniel's chest. But now he realized something. The best way to honor lost comrades might be by living fully, giving hope to those still here. With trembling hands, Daniel refolded the flag carefully, pressing his forehead against it. Apollo let out a soft breath, as though offering silent comfort. When Daniel finally closed the trunk, he felt lighter. An invisible chain loosened. He carefully placed the trunk in a closet corner rather than keeping it in the living area. The past belonged with him, but it didn't need to dominate the present. In the days that followed, life at the outreach center continued. The pilot therapy dog program inched closer to launch. Ms. Porter and Carmen met with city officials to arrange the fenced yard. Troy spearheaded a fundraiser organizing a small community festival where Daniel and Apollo would do a demonstration. Crestline's donation kept rolling in, allowing for practical improvements. Even the walls sported fresh paint, an uplifting light blue that made the center feel more welcoming. Every so often, Daniel thought of Jake's situation. He gave a brief statement to Jake's lawyer, though the outcome remained uncertain. Nevertheless, Daniel felt calmer, knowing he'd done his part to uphold truth. At the warehouse, Earl occasionally texted or called Daniel for advice, missing his steady work ethic. Daniel helped when he could, though his focus now lay squarely on the center. One evening, Ms. Porter paused Daniel before they locked up. "You realize how far you've come, right?" she asked gently, eyes shining with pride. "You've become the man who makes others feel safe, who lifts them out of darkness." Daniel lowered his gaze, a wave of humility washing over him. "I just do what I wish someone had done for me sooner." "That's exactly what makes you good at it." She patted Apollo's shoulder. "And he's taught us all the power of loyalty and connection." Outside, the sky was a tapestry of oranges and purples, the setting sun painting the horizon in vivid brushstrokes. Daniel watched Ms. Porter drive away, then walked Apollo along a quiet side street. He remembered a time when he felt restless, searching, convinced there was no place for him in the civilian world. Now, the path felt clear, each step guided by an inner compass shaped by love, service, and second chances. He and Apollo returned to their apartment, the air cool against his skin. The battered trunk remained in the closet, its contents no longer a shadow but a memory he could face with open eyes. Tomorrow and each day after, he'd rise to greet new challenges, confident that he was forging a life of purpose. And in that life, Apollo was ever by his side, a steadfast companion who had once saved Daniel on foreign soil and kept saving him long afterward. This story reminds us that triumph isn't always measured in medals or glory, but in quiet perseverance, in healing one person or one dog at a time. If you've walked alongside Daniel and Apollo through these chapters, don't forget to show your support by liking, subscribing, and commenting the city you're tuning in from. Together, we can celebrate the truth that hope and loyalty can flourish under any sky, if only we keep believing and keep reaching out to those in need.